Chapter 356. Accident? To the cavalry of the garrison, there might be many accidents in the beginning and the middle of the battle, but there would be no accidents in the end. To this group of bounty hunters, the only accident they could count on was Jilly, who was helping them from the outside. Jilly obviously knew the urgency of the situation, so she had been galloping on her horse from the beginning. Along the way, she had injured many pedestrians and destroyed many merchants' goods, causing even more tragic traffic accidents. Of course, there were no special traffic police in this world. It could be said that almost all the safety matters in the city were under the jurisdiction of the garrison. However, most of the cavalry were still in the corner of the southern city, and the rest would not react so quickly. Thus, Jilly rushed to the city square without any cover. In such a state, her speed was naturally astonishing. They had spent more than half an hour in the morning, but now Jilly was about to arrive, and it had only been 10 minutes. In the city square, people and horses stood up, causing a small area of chaos. The crowd in the center of the square was too dense, but Jilly gritted her teeth and continued to urge her horse forward, passing through the middle. Move aside, move aside. Due to the warning from before, the crowd immediately split in the middle as if it was split by a knife. Naturally, there were people who did not react in time and were knocked to the side. It was unlikely that they would die, but it was inevitable that they would be injured. Panic shouts, angry roars, curses, and painful groans, all kinds of chaotic sounds intertwined together, and the city square was like a pot of boiling water, becoming more and more intense. There was a group of garrison cavalry guarding the so-called mountain stream goddess statue, but in the current situation, even if they wanted to, they could not charge over. After a moment, the black horse flashed, leaving behind a mess. After rushing through the square, Jilly did not stop and continued to rush to the west side of the commercial street. She had gone shopping with Eunice yesterday, so she naturally knew where to find her. Needless to say, the bustling commercial street was in chaos again. However, after a few steps, Jilly reined in her horse and took a deep breath before letting out a sharp cry. Whoosh! It was sharp and ear-piercing, and the sound reverberated for miles, suppressing the bustling commercial street in an instant. After a while, Jilly frowned and was secretly anxious. She took another deep breath. At this moment, a seductive voice slowly came from afar. Jilly happily turned her head and saw Eunice, who was wearing a pleated skirt, walking out of a clothing store with a noble youth a few hundred meters away. Sister Eunice. After saying that, she didn't wait for her to jump off the horse. Be careful. It's too late. Jilly subconsciously turned her head and saw a black figure jump down from the sky. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of her. Then, the gleam of a blade reflected in his eyes. Hiss! He felt a chill on his neck, and the sound of the wind entered his ears. Thanks for leading the way. Under everyone's gaze, a middle-aged man with an indifferent expression stood on the horse. He held a dagger in his right hand and bowed from afar. Eunice, I'm here to kill you. Please advise me. It was drizzling in a gentle breeze. The figure of the woman sitting in front of him swayed, and a thin, blood-red curtain shot out from her neck, splattering in all directions. A woman with heavy makeup in front of the horse subconsciously wiped her face. When she put down her hand, her palm was covered in blood. Chaos is about to begin. Screams rose one after another, and the bustling commercial street became even more lively. Or rather, it was panic. No matter what, it always looked lively. The crowd began to disperse and flee. The extravagant carriages were completely useless here. The people on the carriages rushed down in panic and joined the fleeing army. After a while, the carriages were pushed down and overturned. The fine horse was also brought down to the ground. As if it felt the panic, its four hooves were constantly flipping, trying to stand up. Sometimes it would kick people. The street was a little slippery because it had just rained, so from time to time, women holding umbrellas could be seen falling to the ground, climbing up, and falling again. Mud stained their white dresses and long legs. It was a little embarrassing, but also a little sexy. Tang and did not move and the black horse under him also did not move due to the cold, murderous intent. Jilly, who was lying on the ground, naturally did not move. The surrounding crowd had already dispersed. Even if there were people who ran in the opposite direction in panic, they would subconsciously avoid this place. Eunice, who was in front of the clothing store, also did not move. Her face was cold. When Tang In killed Jilly, she had taken a step forward, but in the end, she gave up. It was too late. Beside her, the young noble looked at Tang In with a stunned expression. It was obvious that he had not sorted out the sudden chaos that had happened. When one's life was threatened, the power that burst out was always great. In just a few minutes, the commercial street was almost emptied. Of course, there were some people who were trampled. Even so, they were trying their best to crawl away. Asterisk patter patter patter. Asterisk, who are you? After a while, a loud question came from the empty street. This question was not asked by Eunice, but by the young noble who had recovered from his shock. At a glance, there were only a few people standing on the street. Even a fool would know that the other party was coming towards them. Although this question did not have any meaning, it was undeniable that it broke the silence in the field. Tangan did not answer. He lightly jumped off the horse and slowly walked towards them while holding the reins. Asterisk patter patter. Asterisk, after walking for more than 100 meters, there was a girl with disheveled hair in front of him. It seemed that her leg had been twisted, and she was sitting on the ground, unable to move. When she saw Tang In holding a dagger and walking towards her expressionlessly, she could not help but panic. Her tears were mixed with the rain. No, don't kill me. Pausing, he turned his head and curled his lips. He reached out and grabbed the girl's waving arm. With a little force, he threw her onto the horse's back while screaming. Then, he turned the reins and patted the horse lightly. The horse turned its hooves and slowly walked to the back. Thank you. You're welcome. After doing all this, Tangan turned around and stood in the rain. He did not continue forward and looked at Eunice indifferently. The young noble who felt ignored was a little angry. He probably wanted to show off in front of the beauty and was about to rush out. Enough. Eunice turned her gaze to the young noble and frowned slightly. Let's stop here for today. Thank you for accompanying me to try on clothes. He really came for you? Don't be afraid. The young noble patted his chest. I'm quite strong. I'll protect you. Asterisk boom. Asterisk before he finished speaking, there was a loud noise. It was Eunice who raised her foot and stomped on the ground. The large bluestone floor immediately cracked and spread like a spider web. Protect you. The young noble opened his mouth and blinked. He lowered his head to look at the ground and then looked at Eunice's slender legs hidden under her skirt. His expression changed rapidly. Sorry, I won't disturb you. He waved his hands and slowly retreated, then turned and ran away. Eunice did not care about him. She glanced at Tang In and turned to enter the clothing store. Tang In frowned slightly, but he did not move to chase after her. He knew that Eunice would not run away without a fight. Sure enough, along with how much is this skirt? And this one, leave this skirt here. I'll come and get it later. Mixed with a few suppressed screams, Eunice walked out again. Her original pleated skirt was gone, and she had changed into a slightly tight-fitting outfit. She was obviously worried that the battle would destroy her beloved clothes. Women, even if they were on the battlefield, they would be more concerned about their own makeup and image than the whistling arrows in the sky. With a flip of her hands, a pair of daggers appeared. Eunice recovered her seductive smile and casually walked over step by step. Tang In still stood in the same place, but if someone came within 10 meters of him, they would feel a shocking chill that penetrated their bones. This area now belonged to him. Outsiders would be killed if they came in. Eunice, who was approaching, seemed to have sensed it. She raised her eyebrows and stood a dozen steps away, blooming a charming smile. You know me, of course. Your strength is not bad, and your killing intent towards me is also very strong. It's strange that I don't have any impression of you. Tilting her head in distress, Eunice stared at Tang In's middle-aged face. You're wearing a disguise? Tang In did not answer, but he was really surprised in his heart. His disguise had never been seen through by others. Sure enough. Her guess was confirmed. Eunice clapped her hands happily and once again looked at Tang En's face. What a fine disguise. I'm more and more interested in you now. And why don't you introduce me? You want to know? Tang En curled his lips and chuckled, but his line of sight never left Eunice's daggers. For people like them, a distance of a dozen steps was too much for a second. Nodding, Eunice curved her crescent-shaped eyes with an expectant expression. I won't tell you. Eunice was slightly stunned, then she covered her mouth and chuckled. Then it's a bit of a pity. An unknown soul will appear under my blade. I'll give it a try. Shrugging his shoulders, Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes and curled his lips. I've also never killed a beauty of this level. I'm a bit looking forward to it. While laughing, the two bent down slightly at the same time and placed their daggers in front of them. It was drizzling and occasionally thunder rolled. The atmosphere gradually stagnated. Chapter 357. A single flower shoe, a broken umbrella, a tilted bamboo basket, a white canvas bag. All kinds of things were strewn all over the place, welcoming the baptism of the drizzle and drifting about in the cold wind. There seemed to be a figure at the far corner of the street, cowering and not daring to approach. There were heads in the nearby shops, carefully peeking at the two people standing opposite each other in the middle of the street. From time to time, they would secretly curse a few times for ruining the business. Tang En and Eunice. If put in another gimmick, it would be a showdown between an assassin in this world and an assassin in another world. There was no doubt that no matter which one it was, they were absolute experts in close combat. Defense was unrealistic when it came to close combat, which was extremely dangerous. Therefore, it was important to seize the initiative. Seizing the initiative naturally did not mean that one could make the first move. That was for low-level martial artists. For people of Tang En and Eunice's level, one must have a clear target and seize the initiative. If one did not find the opponent's flaw and rashly made a move, it was very likely that one would be suppressed in an instant. Then, did Tang En and Eunice have any flaws now? No. At least now in each other's eyes, the opponent's slow movement of the dagger, attention, killing intent, and so on were not flaws worth making a move. Of course, the actions of the two of them made the employees of the shop who were secretly watching them unhappy. So, after such a chaotic and intense prelude, all that was left was staring at each other and posing with their eyes wide open. But at this moment, suddenly, hiss, not far away, a horse that had been brought down earlier struggled a few times. With a long neigh, it broke the reins on its body, got up, and ran away. And this long neigh ignited the fuse of the battle in an instant. Tang En and Eunice's eyes flickered, and their figures disappeared. Ding, ding, ding. When they reappeared in everyone's sight, the two were actually in the middle of the previous distance, not a bit less, not a bit more. It was as if the space of a few meters had never existed. The daggers in the battle had disappeared. Only traces of cold light flowed, and the complicated and fine collision sounds were constantly heard. No one could know how many times the daggers in the two hands had touched in this short moment. Two black figures swayed like windmills, running, entangling, and illusions. Soon, he disappeared from everyone's sight. The onlookers naturally didn't have any good or bad impressions of the two people fighting. After the initial shock, they smacked their lips and recalled the short exchange just now. And it seemed like the one with the dagger was at a disadvantage. Sure enough, having an extra weapon was good, the attacking dagger, the hurried footwork, the figure that looked for a gap to enter. Fast, faster, faster. In this sort of situation, the location of the battle had long since changed. The street, the roadside, and the entrance of the shop dozens of meters away. In a flash, the two people's swift figures could no longer be seen by the eyes of normal people. It was still a clash of daggers. Cold light flashed. Tang En didn't use his blood energy, and Eunice didn't use her fighting energy either. Both of them seemed to have become impulsive and wanted to rely on their basic dagger techniques to suppress each other. Too slow, familiar stranger. Eunice's enchanting figure moved freely in the shadows of the daggers. She flashed behind Tang in with a charming smile and slashed the daggers at his back. Didn't you say you wanted to kill me? I'm right here. Ha! But this bit of strength isn't enough. You're noisy. Tang in rushed forward and lowered his body to avoid the attack. The dagger in his hand drew a half arc, bringing up a few traces of water. If you have the time, why don't you worry about the safety of your companions? Companions? I don't care if they die. At worst, I'll just find another batch. Eunice said coldly in a charming tone. She waved her dagger to parry, and then the dagger in her left hand suddenly stabbed out with cold light. Oh, so you're from the Gray Coat Army? Retreating silently, Tangan seemed to have no time to talk. He pulled back to avoid the cold light. But in an instant, Eunice, who was smiling charmingly, followed beside him again, and her hands threw out sharp dagger shadows. Tang retreated again and smashed the window of a shop. In a few screams, he directly broke through the wall and broke into another shop. Lime flew into the air. After pausing for a moment, Eunice flashed into the large fruit shop. At a glance, except for a few clerks squatting down with their hands on their heads, there was no sign of Tangan. Haha, don't hide. Aren't you here to kill me? She casually cut a fruit, turned the dagger slightly, dug out the pulp, and put it in her mouth. Well, it tastes good. Are you angry? In a short span of a month, 7 hidden locations were wiped out. Ah, do you know the reason? Eunice strolled inside and glanced around. Since you found it, there's no harm in telling you. I just happened to see your poster and was bored to play. She picked up a yellow fruit, threw it, and smashed the fruit pile in the shape of a tall tower in front of her. It was still empty behind. Eunice didn't care and walked forward casually. Although Tang Un's level of concealment surprised her, it was merely concealment. People at this level, when they were prepared, it was basically a joke to attack when they were unprepared. It's just playing. Of course, I have to have fun, so I destroyed one city after another. Haha, this thing is so absurd, isn't it? As soon as her voice fell, another flat voice sounded. Oh, so it's like this. This. Eunice suddenly turned around and flashed to the checkout counter more than 10 meters away on the right side like a ghost. Her daggers fell. Boom! Ah, dash! The counter was torn apart, and there was only a fat merchant holding his head and screaming inside. Frowning, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly and bloomed into a charming smile again. Eunice turned around and said, "You run quite fast. Don't you want to avenge those who died?" "Well, let me think. There are about a few hundred. What about the goshawk?" Suddenly, a voice sounded behind Eunice. She turned around and paused. When Eunice's face changed completely, a green crescent-shaped thing had smashed in front of her. Further behind, a black shadow jumped out from behind the squatting fat man. "I'll treat you to a banana." She waved her dagger and cut it. Oh, it was indeed a banana. Immediately, Eunice's pupils contracted sharply. Dense, bloody dagger shadows filled her sight. They were silent, swift, and several times faster than Tangan's previous attack. Hiss, 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 ding, ding, ding. Dagger shadows wantonly, sparks flew everywhere, and the sound of raindrops hitting banana leaves rang out. Eunice's reaction was a beat slower because of the word goshawk. Coupled with Tang Un's sudden burst of power, she was immediately suppressed. Strike while the iron is hot. Kill while the head is chopped off. Tang would not let go of this opportunity. He waved his dagger with all his strength. He did not use any skills such as chaotic flower, storm, and so on. For someone like Eunice, even a big move with a delay of 1 second was enough for her to escape. Straight stab, horizontal slash, downward slash, upward slash, back and forth, endless. It was simple and crude, and it was speed that won. It's you? It's you. When a station was in chaos, Eunice had fought with Tangan. Although it was only a few seconds, it was enough to leave a deep impression. As soon as Tang sped up and released his blood aura, she immediately recognized him. Her usual charming smile disappeared. Eunice's face was like frost, and she did not hide the cold, killing intent in her eyes. But no matter how much hatred she had, the first thing she had to deal with now was the layers of dagger shadows that covered the sky in front of her. In a narrow space, the effect of two daggers was not as obvious as imagined. For example, Tang in now, one dagger was enough to seal off the area. Eunice had never been a person who liked to defend, especially now in a battle between assassins. Defending was equivalent to courting death, so she did not hesitate to choose to attack. But the space was only so big. Tang had taken the initiative and had already occupied most of the space. Her dagger counterattack was more like an attack in place of defense. The constantly moving figure, the terrifying and intensive attacks. In an instant, the two of them fought a seemingly harmonious scene in a high-intensity battle. No one was defending, no one was injured, and looking at this situation, it seemed that it could be maintained forever. Of course, this was just an illusion. No one could not make mistakes and be stable all the time. The difference was who reached the critical point of the limit first. At that time, one attack was enough to determine life and death. Yes, as Tang had said to Josiah before, in such a rhythm, it was impossible to defeat and capture the opponent. With limited choices, only one of them would die, or both of them would perish together. Calculating the attack route, calculating the opponent's attack route, attacking, counterattacking. In just a few minutes, the physical strength and mental strength of both of them were rapidly consumed. Sweat was faintly visible on their faces. The only difference was that Tang was wearing a camouflage mask, and most of the sweat was inside. No, I have to retreat. Eunice bit her lip, and such a thought flashed in her mind. Of course, this was a helpless move. Eunice had lost the initiative before, and she had hoped to turn it around. But at this point in the battle, this idea had long been dispelled. The strength that Tang suddenly broke out was not below her. Now, she could only retreat in the hope of widening the distance. If she did not retreat, when Tang's advantage increased, there would be no way to retreat. Thinking of this, Eunice did not stop attacking, but her feet moved, and she rushed out with her back. It was not so easy to retreat. Turning around and running away was the rhythm of courting death. Only in a large-scale mobile battle could she possibly find an opportunity. Want to leave? How could it be so easy? Tang instantly saw through Eunice's thoughts, and with a fierce dagger shadow, he followed like a shadow. Bang! The wooden shelf holding fruits bore the brunt of the impact and was fragmented. Boom! The thin wooden wall in the shop was smashed, and sawdust flew. Boom! The heavy brick wall was broken, and a human-shaped hole appeared. Dash, retreat. Retreat again. Advance, advance again. Suppress, suppress. Continue to suppress. Tang had painstakingly set up such a situation. How could he easily let the opponent escape? So, even though Eunice screamed again and used her body movements, she still could not get rid of the attacks that were like maggots in the tarsal bone. And to turn while retreating was a whimsical thing, because this meant that the side of the body was exposed and the range of defense would be increased. So in the end, Eunice could only use her back to smash the obstacles behind her again and again. Chapter 358. Boom, boom, boom. Bean-sized water droplets fell one after another, and the rain seemed to be getting heavier. However, the trembling roar did not come from the clouds, but from the various shops on the south side of the street. Mixed with the screams, the ground shook nonstop, as if a giant dragon had turned over. The houses on the ground were like controlled dolls, forming a line of dominoes that shook spectacularly. Probably because the shaking was too fierce, all kinds of signboards began to fall down, and the goods inside flew out one after another. Such a disaster-level movement naturally attracted the attention of all the people who were still there. The business street that had just been cleaned was once again in chaos, but this time the target was not the innocent passers-by, but the tragic shops. Oh my God. Damn it, my shop. Idiot, do you want the shop or your life? The shop staff who were still free to watch screamed and ran out from inside, not daring to stay. They cursed in a low voice as they ran towards the end of the street. The destruction of a good shop naturally made people angry and sad, but relatively speaking, their lives were more important. Bang, 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 bang. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to... You're a repeater. Die, 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 die. The collision rumbled, screams and roars. In the dim and complicated environment, the shadows of the daggers crisscrossed. Although most of them were blocked, they still could not cover the cold light that belonged to them. Eunice felt that she was going crazy. Retreating one step, she had no choice but to retreat. Her retreat strategy could be said to have failed miserably so far. In fact, this strategy was not bad. If she had stuck to the original defense, the result would have been worse. Eunice's mistake was that she was too confident in her speed. In fact, other than the space magician saying pooh, her speed was the first in the Dusk Hunter group, which was full of experts. Even the archer Goshawk was slightly inferior to her. But now, in front of her, Tangin had been following her like a shadow until now, and she had not been shaken off even by a centimeter. Of course, the most fundamental mistake was that Eunice had underestimated her opponent, or it could be said that she was too playful and fell into Tangin's trap. She had the strength of Earth Stage high rank. If she first threw out a big move and then attacked with all her strength, Tang would have no other choice but to be suppressed to death. However, she first competed with her dagger skills and then competed with her speed. She didn't dare to say anything else, but these 2 points were indeed Tang on strong points. Even if she was not much better than Eunice, she was definitely not weaker than her. One careless move, and the whole game would be lost. In such a high-intensity battle style, any ultimate moves would be useless. Even the slightest pause would result in death. Therefore, Eunice was helpless except for retreating and parrying. Compared to the depressed Eunice, Tangin's thoughts were extremely simple. He wanted to kill the other party in one go. This opportunity was not easy to come by. The other party was now in his rhythm. If he could not grasp this opportunity, he would not be worthy of being called a killer. Bang! After crashing through another load-bearing wall, Eunice exploded. The dignity of an Earth Stage martial artist did not allow her to die in such a humiliating way. Her eyes flashed with a fierce light. Since it's like this, then let's bet our lives. After saying that, her wrist shook, and the layers of black dagger shadows gradually disappeared. In contrast, the hissing sound of air breaking became more intense. It still came to this step. Tang sighed in his heart. Eunice's current move was to crazily increase the frequency of her attacks. In addition to bringing about sharper attacks, it also meant that she was out of control. Limited by talent, hard work, and other reasons, everyone's body was limited. If it exceeded this limit, it would not be within the range of control. It was naturally hard to say what the result would be. Okay, let's bet our lives. Lightly responding, Tangin narrowed his long and narrow eyes and crazily increased the frequency of his attacks. Whether it was to deal with the attack in front of him or to worry about the situation after, Tang could not refuse this proposal. In an instant, the battle reached a climax from the beginning. Gradually, the dagger shadows disappeared, the dagger disappeared, half of the arm disappeared. Of course, this was not a real disappearance, but it could no longer be seen by the naked eye. Ding, 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 ding. There was almost no interval between the continuous collision of the daggers, almost forming a line and forming a sound. Out of control, Tang only felt that his arm, which was wielding the dagger, was gradually losing feeling. When he raised his eyes, he happened to meet Eunice's gaze and understood. She also lost control. The most direct effect of losing control was the accuracy of the attack. Previously, Tang and Eunice's daggers had never left each other's vital points, but now they could not do it. It could not be helped, their arms had lost feeling. So how could they control the landing point? They could not control their attacks, and they could only rely on their senses to defend. So, gradually the second effect appeared. Tang and Eunice's bodies continued to have more wounds, the most on their arms, followed by their bodies. These were not fatal places that the two of them disdained to attack previously, but now they were the most seriously affected. This was the result of the two of them not completely losing control and consciously protecting their vital points. It could be foreseen that after a while, if either of the two suddenly fell to the ground and died, it would not be strange. It was cruel, but it was the truth. In terms of probability, Tang and had a slight advantage. After all, most of the space he occupied before was still there. Well, the mortality rate was about 30 to 70. Of course, such a calculation was unreasonable, because in terms of luck, the possibility of being stabbed 7 times and not dying, and then being stabbed in the vital point was still very high, and this was the so-called gamble of life. Shoulder? It doesn't matter. Chest? Oh, it's not the left chest. Is it the shoulder again? Forget it. It's healthier to poke. Feeling the pain on his body, Tang En's mood was particularly calm. The battle situation had evolved to this extent. It was completely a matter of luck. So, why not be more carefree? After all, people will always die. No one wanted to die, and Tang En did not want to, especially when he had already experienced it once. But death was not something that you could refuse if you didn't want to or want to. Now, he was like a whale shark in the sea, compared to dying of old age and falling on the fine sand at the bottom of the sea. He was more willing to fight to the death and hang under the spear with blood dripping from the net. Compared to Tang En, who looked at death indifferently, Eunice was a little strange now. There was no fear, and her eyes were flashing with madness, danger, and so on. The expression on her face was similar to, "This thing is very fun. Where will the next stab be?" Sure enough, when a woman became crazy, she could not be judged by common sense. Gradually, the position of the wound gradually shifted to the vital point. Eunice's neck was stabbed, but unfortunately, it was not an artery. Tang En's left chest was also stabbed. Fortunately, the wound was very shallow and did not touch the heart inside. Just when the two sides were about to decide life and death, suddenly, boom, the wall was broken through and the eyes were bright. Raindrops also fell on the body in an instant, because both of them were increasing the attack frequency, and the previous rhythm was in Tang En's hands. Eunice was still slowly retreating. But no one expected that this normal collision would directly come to the outside. Or to be precise, it came to the side of the central square. Because it was facing directly, Tang En caught a glimpse of the towering statue of the mountain stream goddess. The benevolent face was very dazzling. F***CK? The battle situation changed again. Chapter 359. I just came back from the wedding tonight, so I'll write a chapter first. Tomorrow, I'll write 3 chapters. The statue of the mountain stream goddess had stood in the city for hundreds of years. It had a long history and had become the symbol and facade of the city. Regardless of whether it was to take advantage of the situation or not, the mountain stream goddess had been recognized as the first holy maiden of the Temple of Light. She stood here and received the worship of thousands of believers. After so many years, the statue was not undamaged, but it was generally only a small area of natural weathering. When the first signs of damage appeared, it was quickly repaired by skilled craftsmen. As for intentional destruction, that had never happened before. Even if you put aside the extreme hatred of the people of Mountain Stream City, the Temple of Light was a behemoth that no one dared to provoke. Because of this, the statue was usually only guarded by a team of garrison cavalry. In fact, it was more accurate to say that they were casually looking after it to prevent extremist believers from touching the goddess at close range and damaging the life of the statue. But now, the captain of the cavalry was directly smashed to death by the statue's head. Some of the other cavalrymen were quick enough to escape, but that was only temporary. They stood in the heavy rain in a daze as they watched the entire statue of the goddess fall to the ground. Then, the whole statue gradually collapsed. Although most of it was covered by the black fog, everyone knew that the statue was finished. Everyone's mind was in a mess as they imagined the possible destruction that this could bring. First of all, there was no doubt that they were absolutely dead. Second, even if the Temple of Light did not take action, the anger of those believers could turn the entire Mountain Stream City upside down. Let's not talk about how the cavalrymen were in a daze. Let's turn our attention to the culprits of this disaster, Tang En and Eunice. When a netherworld dark mist and the red whirlwind first came into contact, they were evenly matched. Neither was at a disadvantage. Eunice's strength was indeed stronger, but she was seriously injured now, which seriously affected the performance of the entire big move. As for the later movement, it was Tang In who did it first. He had no choice. If the whirlwind stayed in place, its power would inevitably become weaker and weaker. It was only through constant movement that he could store more energy for the future. As for the later collision with the statue of the goddess, well, it was really just an accident. Collision, entanglement, counterattack. The dark nether mist and the red whirlwind continued to entangle with each other, and their strength was constantly being consumed. In fact, by the time he crashed into the statue, it was already the end of his madness. The statue of the goddess was so tall that ordinary people might not be able to destroy it even if they wanted to. When the exhausted black fog whirlwind crashed into it, not only did it destroy the foundation of the statue, it also caused the statue itself to collapse. In an instant, the black fog dispersed and covered the sky. The whirlwind cracked, and the saber cut through the sky. This area instantly became the most dangerous area, and no one dared to approach it. But of course, this did not include Tang In and Eunice. After the two of them were blown to the side by the shockwave caused by the collision, their eyes flashed almost at the same time. They forcefully suppressed the blood in their throats and the injuries in their bodies and quickly rushed forward. This was an opportunity. Although this area had become very dangerous, it was also the fairest battlefield. As long as any one of them could seize the opportunity to land a successful blow or force the other party into a storm of blades, the battle could be declared over. As for the danger to themselves, not to mention that both of them were extremely confident in their speed. Even if this was the dragon's cave, it was impossible for them to retreat. In the end, life and death would have to be determined, and this was the most suitable battlefield. Although the surroundings had become pure darkness because of the dark nether mist, the two of them did not hide their killing intent, which became the brightest indicator for the other party. There was no need to listen to the sound to determine the location. The sound of daggers clashing could be heard immediately. Huff! Huff! At this point in the battle, both of their bodies were actually infinitely close to collapse. Therefore, other than a fatal blow to their vital points, they turned a blind eye to any other places that were attacked. Such a loud breathing sound. Why can't you do it? Eunice dodged a wind blade, and then under the cover of the sound, she stabbed out silently. You're talking about me? Slightly dodging, the other party's dagger pierced his crippled left arm, and a kick landed on Eunice's lower abdomen. Tang Un's disdainful voice was heard. You don't even have the strength to stab people, and your blood is almost all drained? Aren't you the same? Groaning, in order to avoid the wind blade behind her, Eunice gritted her teeth and endured the kick. Even if I bleed to the last drop of blood, I will kill you before that happens. Agreed, that's what I wanted to say. Take note, this knife is aimed at your face. Talking in a battle would undoubtedly distract one's attention, but although the battle between the two was tragic, it was more like a street brawl that would not end until one of them died. In this situation, of course, some unpresentable tricks were used, such as verbal attacks, which could not only disturb the other party's mind, but also wear down the other party's perseverance. But in just a moment, Eunice, who made the first move, regretted it. One must know that Tang In came from a modern world, which was rich in information. His moral integrity and whatnot had long been broken to the ground. Regarding a woman's weakness, he was almost able to open his mouth, and every sentence was a targeted attack. Excuse me, you're scaring me. Is this a chest? Why does it look like a water bag? Words like these made Eunice extremely depressed, and she almost vomited blood. To be able to use such a trick, it also meant that the two of them were indeed at the end of their rope. If this continued, there would only be one result, and that was mutual destruction. Of course, this was only the most likely guess. In fact, with the exhaustion of physical and mental strength, the two's current tactical movements had become extremely irregular, and various small mistakes were constantly occurring. Unfortunately, the other party was the same and could not seize the opportunity in time. Gradually, The two's nimble figures became stiff. The number of attacks on the other party was decreasing, and on the contrary, the movements of dodging the wind blades were becoming more and more difficult. It was also at this moment that Eunice was once again caught in a pincer attack by two wind blades, but Tang inside was almost the same. Although 4 or 5 wind blades had not reached him, they had already formed an encirclement. Under normal circumstances, Tang In should withdraw at this time and try to advance from the back. But hit. Suddenly, Tang In stepped forward with all his might and accurately stabbed at Eunice's heart. The situation of the battle changed abruptly in an instant. This time, Tang In seized the opportunity, and there was no problem in making a move. If Eunice could not withstand it, then only death would await her. But if Eunice was lucky and did not die, then Tang In would face a desperate situation. This time, life and death will be decided in one blow. Finally unable to hold on and have to take a risk, Eunice's eyes flashed and she stared at the dagger. Pooh, Piu, Piu. Tang Un's dagger hit Eunice's body, but it was not on the left side of her chest, but in the middle. At the same time, the two wind blades mercilessly slashed at the side of Eunice's body. Damn it! Tang Un's expression changed greatly. He did not have time to rotate the dagger to enlarge the wound and immediately withdrew. From the looks of it, he seemed to have made a mistake. Eunice opened her mouth and spat out a big mouthful of blood, but she once again bloomed into a seductive smile. She was now seriously injured, but she was not dead yet. The two wind blades collided in front of her, and there was a small error, so she took the opportunity to move her body a few centimeters. It was only a few centimeters, but the situation took a sudden turn for the worse. He died. Eunice did not care about her injuries at all. She forcefully circulated her do chi, jumped up, and waved layers of dagger shadows. This was the strongest attack she could use now. Although it was somewhat inaccurate, and the dagger shadows were unevenly distributed, there was no doubt that she had blocked Tang In's front. As for the side and rear, 3 or 4 wind blades had already arrived. Desperate situation. Roar. Tang In also seemed to have realized that something was wrong. He quickly stopped retreating, and with a roar, blood flashed, and directly faced Eunice's dagger, as if he wanted to die together with her. A dying struggle. Eunice's face was full of disdain. She naturally judged that the surrounding wind blades would first slash Tang In's body before the two came into contact. Crack, crack, crack. Puff, puff. A sharp and desperate scream, mixed with the sound of a body being pierced, was heard. The cavalrymen outside were startled. They turned their gazes back to the black fog. Was the outcome decided? Bang! A black figure was knocked out of the fog, smashing half of the water bottle in the hand of the goddess statue. Immediately, white water droplets shot up into the sky like a fountain. The treasure bottle in the hand of the mountain stream goddess statue could keep dripping water every day, naturally because it was connected to a device inside. Now it seemed that it was just something similar to a water spout. Raindrops kept falling, and the water spout went against the flow. Soon, the black fog that was about to dissipate gradually thinned. At this time, the figure who was knocked out was half sitting on the ground. The dart dagger in his left chest was particularly eye-catching. He put his head close to the water spout, letting the water hit his face. Puff, puff, puff. The black figure shook the water droplets on his hair and stood up with difficulty. His long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly, looking at the figure standing in the black fog, and grinned. I was tricked. Yes, this person was Tang In. According to his character, how could he take such a risk to attack? All of this was just a trap. Yes, at that time he was in a desperate situation, his life hanging by a thread. And what saved him was an auxiliary skill that was no longer commonly used, bone shrinkage skill. He had already seen the surrounding wind blades clearly. As long as he shrank his body by 2 times in an instant, he could avoid the danger of being cut in half at the waist. In fact, he really did it, and under Eunice's shocked gaze, he stabbed the dagger into her heart. Of course, he also paid a price for this. In addition to a few frightening wounds from the wind blades, Eunice's dagger, which lost its aim, also grazed his heart and pierced through his body. Of course, this was not fatal. Then he was gently patted out by Eunice's crippled right hand. The smoke was thin, and Eunice's figure was gradually exposed. She did not fall down, but was still standing upright, with a dagger in her left chest. You won. Chapter 360. You've won. Eunice sighed faintly. Her face was a little blurred behind the thin mist. Her tone was indifferent, without joy or sorrow. It was just a fluke. Tang touched his nose, appearing rather sincere. This was the truth. In fact, at this point in the battle, no matter who died, it would not be surprising. In the end, Tang was still alive, which only meant that his plan had succeeded by a fluke. Although the bone shrinkage technique was rare in a different world, it was not non-existent. As long as one could undergo the corresponding training at a young age, this technique could be learned by ordinary people. For example, some magic tricks in the circus would often use this trick. This was not a brilliant tactic. Now, it had become the decisive factor. Other than the perfect timing and being too sudden, the most important thing was that Eunice had reached the limit of her body. When she threw out that attack, she had already dashed forward without thinking about her own safety. There was simply no way for her to make a second response. But no matter what, since this soul-stirring battle had already determined life and death, the two of them did not do anything tasteless like cursing before death, adding insult to injury, and so on. Of course, in the eyes of the cavalry watching from the side, this was very inexplicable. Now, both of them were standing upright with daggers in their chests. Who won in the end? It would be best if they perished together. The cavalry looked at each other, somewhat cowering. On one hand, they were cursing this adulterous couple who caused the death of others, but on the other hand, they did not dare to go forward and attack. After all, the battle between the two of them was indeed a little frightening. Her body swayed twice, but she finally stood firm. Eunice stepped out of the statue ruins and slowly walked out. The wandering cavalry immediately subconsciously took 2 steps back, clutching their spears tightly, looking flustered. Tang raised his eyebrows and looked at Eunice, who was walking towards him. He did not make any defensive movements. It was true that the dagger was stabbed into the left side of his chest, but Tang did not have time to pull out the dagger, nor did he have time to explode his blood and chi to shatter the opponent's heart. He was directly sent flying. This kind of injury, even an ordinary person would twitch, not to mention Eunice, who was an Earth Stage warrior. Of course, this state could not be maintained for too long. He believed that in a few minutes, Eunice would really collapse. As for attacking, that was even more impossible. Walking to Tang side, Eunice suddenly tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled charmingly. Do I look really scary right now? Tang opened his mouth, looking both shocked and a little embarrassed. He was shocked because he lamented that women's obsession with appearance was truly terrifying. As for the awkwardness, it was because he had hurt her with his words earlier. Now, he was considering whether he should say something to appease her. Of course, Eunice's current condition was not good. It could even be said that it was too horrible to look at. His hair was drooping from the rain, and his face was as pale as a sheet of paper. There was a horrifying wound at the corner of his eye, which made him look unusually ferocious when he smiled. Her originally enchanting body was in an even more miserable state. Needless to say, the dagger was hanging from her body, and the cloth was scattered all over the place. The beautiful skin underneath could not be seen. Only the horrifying state of her flesh and blood could be seen. But no matter what, the dead were more important. Even if there was a great hatred, Tang would not care about it at this time. He touched his nose and said, "It's okay. This temperament can still be seen." Eunice probably saw Tang's hesitation. She shook her head and chuckled. Then she walked past him and walked to the back. Tang was really a little surprised at this time. He could not understand Eunice's thoughts at all, but it was obviously not convenient to ask anything at this time. He paused and could only follow behind her. There was no other way. The dagger had to be taken back. The cavalrymen behind him looked at each other again. They were quite hesitant. They had an unshirkable responsibility for the destruction of the statue. In fact, they should have attacked at this time anyway. As long as they left Tang In and Eunice behind, their responsibility would undoubtedly be reduced. But they did not know whether it was because of the strength of the two or because the atmosphere was too strange. In the end, the cavalrymen did not dare to go forward. They stared blankly at the two figures that slowly disappeared into the rain. Tang In and Eunice suddenly breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Then, they could not help but look at each other and chuckle. Although they could still maintain their normal state on the surface. In fact, they had completely lost their combat ability. If the dozen cavalrymen caught up, Tang In would definitely run away without saying anything. Moreover, it was really a problem whether he could run away. As for Eunice, it was needless to say. As long as she made any strenuous movements, she would instantly lie down and become a corpse. With this sudden tacit understanding, Eunice raised her eyebrows. She was like a child who could not help but snicker after a successful prank. "Did you see what we just destroyed?" "I saw it." Tang In's face twitched twice. He said expressionlessly, "The statue of the Mountain Creek goddess." Tang In thought about the introduction of the coachmen when they came and the scene when he saw the believers kneeling down. His gums suddenly hurt and he grimaced. "I just gave you a middle finger. Do you have to use the price of self-harm to play with me? I suddenly feel that it's not bad to die, cough, cough." The hanging dagger trembled twice. Its body swayed, and blood began to seep out from the corner of its mouth. Tang In scratched his head, then shrugged indifferently. He stepped forward and held Eunice's left arm. "Thank you. You're welcome. What are you going to do?" Eunice turned her head, and the corners of her mouth suddenly curled up. Do you need me to reserve a place for you with the demons?" "Thank you, but no need." Tang In's mouth twitched again, and he tried his best to reply calmly. However, he could not help but sigh in his heart. "So I came to this other world to go against this temple of light." They had tried to assassinate Sessman a few times and killed a few priests, as well as some knights of light. These few days were even worse. The statues of the god of light and the first-generation saintess were all smashed. It could be imagined that once Tang In's crime was exposed, only the Church of the God of Desolation and the entire Caesar continent would clap their hands and welcome him. "Oh, that's right." Eunice seemed to understand something and nodded. "You're using a disguise, so no one will recognize you." Tang In shrugged non-committally and did not explain further. Now that he had too many debts, he was no longer worried. Even if the matter of him smashing the statues was not exposed, he would still try to assassinate Sessman. With the other party's high status now, it would undoubtedly mean that he would continue to provoke the Temple of Light. But it's better not to reject so quickly. I'll leave a place for you." Eunice looked at the misty world in the distance. It's been almost 10 years since the Dusk Hunter group was formed. The members have always been 5 people, and their relationship is not bad. Later on, I want to join a boy who played with explosives. In the end, he died in your hands together with Goshawk during that operation. Play with explosives? Tang In touched his nose and asked tentatively, "Was it that person who wore black armor and threw explosive crystals everywhere to create chaos when you were saving people?" "Yes, how did you know?" At this point, Eunice suddenly turned her head and stared straight at Tang In. The corners of the latter's eyes twitched, and he nodded helplessly. "Really?" Eunice was stunned, and her mouth opened slightly. Then, she shook her head speechlessly. "Including me, you've already killed 3. The leader and the others won't let you go." A friendly reminder. The leader's strength is getting more and more unpredictable. I'm afraid he's about to step into the threshold of void rank. As they spoke, the two stepped into the commercial street again. It was still deserted here, and no one dared to come back. Then come. Tang In picked up a relatively intact umbrella from the ground and opened it. He first replied fearlessly, and then said indifferently, "If we can't provoke them, we can always hide. It's already planned. After killing you this time, we'll hide for a while." These words were very cowardly, but that was the truth. Of course, they would fight if they could, but if it was obvious that they couldn't win, they naturally had to run. Not to mention that Tang En's disguise was the best in this world, and no one could easily recognize him. Even if he was forced to go back to the base to hide, with Zwafan there, the other party couldn't do anything to him. Is that so? A mysterious smile appeared on Eunice's face. Then you'd better hide quickly. They'll find you soon. A what? Hee hee. Eunice looked up at the ruined commercial street and smiled casually. Do you think I'll even tell you this? Tang En frowned. With Eunice's current situation, she wouldn't say such boring words to scare people. However, he scanned his body and didn't find anything unusual. Don't look for it. It may appear by itself later. After leaving such an inexplicable sentence, Eunice turned her head and looked around. Her eyes suddenly lit up. Ha, found it. After saying that, she pushed away Tang En's arm and walked straight to a half-collapsed shop. Tang En didn't find any tracking items on his body. In the end, he simply scratched his head and followed the somewhat neurotic Eunice. He was also somewhat curious. What exactly made Eunice unable to forget before her death? In that shop, Tang En looked at the signboard on the ground beside him and immediately remembered that this was the clothing shop where Eunice had appeared before. Come in and help. Tang En raised his eyebrows and walked in. Inside was indeed the clothing shop. The undamaged walls were hung with all kinds of clothes. Moreover, looking at the style of the clothes and the environment inside, this shop was very high class. Eunice pointed to half of the collapsed wall. Help me, puff, cough, cough, move this away. As she spoke, she spat out another mouthful of blood. Her face was unusually rosy. Of course, this wasn't a sign of recovery, but the final radiance of the setting sun before her death. Tang En didn't refuse. He nodded silently and walked over. He moved the bricks on top of the wall away one by one. Not long after, the wardrobe that was crushed below and a few wrapped cloth bags appeared. And it's that white bag. Thank you. Eunice took the cloth bag and tore it open. What fell out was the pleated floral dress from before. After stroking the hem of the dress a few times, Eunice suddenly stretched out her left hand and grabbed the scattered pieces of cloth on her body. Hiss, hiss, hiss. They were all torn off. Tang En touched his nose. She wasn't completely naked now because there was still underwear on her lower body. However, the palm-sized cloth really couldn't cover much. Of course, even so, it wouldn't make people have any romantic thoughts. Because her naked body was covered with wounds of various sizes. Next, Eunice held the dagger in front of her chest, pulled it gently, raised her hand, and threw the dagger with traces of blood towards Tang En. Subconsciously catching it, Tang En stared blankly at Eunice, who struggled to put on the dress. A red mark gradually appeared on her chest. The floral ornaments changed color. The dagger was pulled out and blood gushed out. Eunice's life was about to come to an end. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and turned around. The hem of her dress fluttered in the wind. Help me tie the knot. Tang En put away the dagger, stepped forward silently, and tied the dozens of knots one by one. Eunice took 2 steps back. Her left hand kept tidying up her scattered hair, trying to gather it together. Then, she turned around from the right side. She put her hands on her waist and revealed a seductive smile. Now, opening his mouth, Tang En was stunned for a moment. Then, he quickly reacted and nodded affirmatively. Very beautiful. After wearing the dress, the wounds on her body were naturally covered. Turning around from the right side, the wound on the other side of her face could no longer be seen. The red glow before death, the tall and enchanting figure, the extremely charming smile. It was undeniable that at this moment, Eunice indeed had a kind of breathtaking charm. That's good. As if relieved of a heavy burden, Eunice raised her arms with difficulty. The red tide on her face surged again. It was dark red like blood. Then, wisps of black fog appeared. It was faint, but just enough to envelop her body. Hee 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 hee. A string of sweet laughter came out. After a moment, it gradually faded and then disappeared. The rain hit the door and windows. The cold wind gradually approached. The faint black fog also dispersed. Eunice, the pleated floral dress, was empty. Perhaps only the slightly corroded floor could prove that there was indeed such a person here. Chapter 361. The rain continued to pour, and the sky was still as dark as ink. When the battle in the city square came to an end, the encirclement in the southern corner of the city had also come to an end. Badly mutilated corpses were being moved out of the door. There were cavalrymen and bounty hunters. The corpses were divided into two areas, and it was clear that the number of corpses on the cavalrymen's side was far greater than the other side. Large patches of dark red blood mixed with the rain, giving off a faint yellow color as it slowly spread through the gaps in the floor. The outcome of this battle, which had been decided from the start, did not have any accidents in the end. It ended with the police department's victory. Dimpus, who was sitting under the eaves to avoid the rain, had a complicated expression on his face. It was both unsightly and excited. He was excited because after such a long battle, they had finally wiped out this group of troublesome bounty hunters. As for the unsightly expression, it was because the losses on their side were too great. Although they had not received a detailed statistical report, it was obvious that the casualties on their side were not small. But overall, he was still a little more excited. The casualties could be covered up with vague statements, but the merits were real. After all, this was a successful ambush, and the target was a notorious bounty hunter. "Sir, the results are out." The head of the cavalryman rushed over in the heavy rain. "Speak." Dimpus's heart jumped, but his expression remained unchanged. "There were a total of 15 of these damned bounty hunters, and they have all been wiped out." 15? Dimpus frowned. "Wasn't it 17? The head of the cavalryman explained. "There are still 2 that haven't arrived. But it doesn't matter. We just need to go to the tavern later, and we can wipe them out in one fell swoop." "Yes, we have to hurry. How about this? You will personally bring people over." Dimpus was slightly relieved, but he still instructed. "Okay, next, we will talk about the casualties on our side." Waving his hand, Dimpus frowned. "We will talk about this when we return." Okay. Then I will bring people to the tavern first." Although the head of the cavalryman looked boorish, he was quick-witted. After guessing that Dimpus did not like to hear this, he readily avoided the topic. After speaking, he saluted and was about to turn around and charge into the rain. But at this moment, "Ta, ta, ta. Sir, where is Sir?" The sound of galloping horse hooves mixed with panicked shouts quickly passed through the curtain of rain and reached here. For some reason, Dimpus's heart suddenly thumped as he vaguely had a bad feeling. Soon, a cavalryman covered in mud was brought over. Rushing forward, Zhang Xian did not even bother to pay his respects to the other party. "Chief, something big has happened. Mother asterisk Kerr, get to the point." The cavalry chief was a little annoyed by the cavalry's shouting and yelling, so he roared loudly. Yes, yes, yes." The cavalryman was stunned for a moment before he nodded submissively. There was chaos in the city square. More than 10 people died and hundreds were injured. "What?" Dimpus and the cavalry chief roared at the same time, their expressions rapidly turning gloomy. The plaza in the middle of the city was the most important place in the city. If there was chaos in this place and people died, it would not be a small matter. Correspondingly, the responsibility of the garrison was not small. Also, the cavalryman paused for a moment. Perhaps it was because he was running in a hurry just now, and because he was frightened by the chief of cavalry, he subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "There's more?" Dimpus and the cavalry chief had yet to recover from the first blow. Hearing that there was a follow-up, they immediately looked at the cavalryman in a daze. "Mother asterisk Kerr, say it." The cavalry chief had a violent temper. Looking at the cavalryman's appearance, he wished he could strangle him to death. Also cough cough. Although he choked on his saliva, the cavalryman did not dare to be negligent when he saw the expressions of the 2 officers. With a flushed face, he continued, "Also, more than half of the West Commercial Street was destroyed." In cough cough. Damn it." The cavalry chief opened his mouth and heavily hammered his palm. His face was completely char-black. Thump, thump, thump. Dimpus retreated 3 steps before stabilizing himself. His face was pale as he stuttered in disbelief. Are you sure it's the West Commercial Street in the city square and not the West City District's Commercial Street?" The difference between the 2 places did not sound big, but in reality, the difference was very obvious. The West City District's commercial street was an ordinary commercial street. Generally, it was opened by slightly wealthy commoners or small merchant associations. As for the West Commercial Street beside the city square, its location was extremely good and there were many people. It was a place that merchants would fight for. Because of this, those who could open shops, there were mostly nobles in the city, as well as some wealthy merchants and celebrities. Therefore, the importance of the two places could not be mentioned in the same breath. The cavalryman understood the meaning of the chief's words, but he could only sob and spread out his hands, breaking Dimpus' fantasy. It's the West Commercial Street, near the city square. Cough, cough, bang. Dimpus sat back down under the eaves, his eyes lifeless. Imagining how his office would be occupied by many nobles and how he would cower in fear to receive their anger and saliva, he felt his legs go soft. The cavalryman finally finished his battle with the saliva. Looking at the two petrified officers in front of him, he hesitated for a moment before carefully saying, Also. Dimpus did not roar this time, and only asked with a stupefied expression. He then raised his head and looked over. Then say it, oh. The cavalryman felt his hair stand on end after being stared at by Dimpus and the cavalry chief. He uneasily twisted his body and gritted his teeth as he softly said, Mountain Creek goddess statue was destroyed. Thump, thump, thump. Bang. The cavalry chief's majestic body retreated a few large steps before crashing into the wall, following which his face turned ashen. His body was first stooped before he crouched down and hugged his head with both hands, curling up into a ball. When a person received a huge shock, they would subconsciously cover their face with both hands or hug their head. This represented the ostrich mentality of not wanting to accept the truth. Without a doubt, the cavalry chief was currently in such a situation. Dimpus, on the other hand, appeared very calm. Yes, calm. His eyebrows did not even twitch. The cavalryman hesitated for a moment before probing. Hall chief? Dimpus' eyelids quickly rolled and turned white, following which his body leaned back. Bang. Chief, Chief has fainted. Well, let's take the camera away from the tragic Dempsey for a moment, and then keep going in the northwest direction. In an unknown forest, gray fog was lingering. The surroundings were deathly silent. Some of the normal chirping of insects and birds seemed to have collectively lost their voices. It was as if they never existed, emitting an indescribable strangeness. Suddenly, boom, 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 a series of loud explosions came from afar and gradually turned from indistinct to clear. Occasionally, there would be a few angry shouts and the roars of giant beasts, as if a battle was moving towards this direction. Finally, bang, a shrub exploded and grass and branches flew everywhere. Following which, a figure leaped out from behind and rolled a few times on the ground before quickly standing up. His hands were wide open and silver light flickered, instantly forming the shape of a moon in front of him. At this moment, a red arrow of light shot out from the direction that the man had come from and hit the silver moon disk. Boom, 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 a shock wave that was almost visible to the naked eye spread out, and the surrounding ground was instantly shaved off a few inches, directly clearing the area. As for the ancient trees that were hit, they were directly uprooted from the ground before being crushed into dregs in the air. Bang, bang, bang. The person who had rushed out first was sent flying backward, crashing through more than a dozen large trees before he finally managed to stop himself. He fell to the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. He had a head full of silver hair with a few stalks of grass in the middle. From his appearance, this was a man who should be a young man. However, the strength of the Do Chi that burst out just now was really strong and was not lower than the earth grade. This made people wonder if this person had some kind of maintenance technique to maintain his youthful state. Bang! The silver-haired man had just wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth when the shrub that had been blown up earlier was directly flattened. A yellow shadow flashed, and a giant beast with golden hair that looked like a tiger or lion appeared on the scene. Looking around, it quickly found the silver-haired man. When they saw this, they couldn't help but cry out in surprise. This was because in the middle of the giant beast's brows, there was an inverted golden eye with a red light flickering inside. If they guessed correctly, the red arrow of light just now came from this eye. The man and the beast looked at each other for a moment before the silver-haired man suddenly waved his hand and a silver light flashed. The giant beast immediately bent down and clenched its claws in a defensive posture. Unexpectedly, the silver-haired man just waved his hand and did not attack at all. He raised his head and laughed a few times before leaping out with a push against a tree trunk. Roar! The giant beast seemed to have some intelligence. After knowing that it had been fooled, its eyes turned blood red and it roared furiously. Then, its claws dug into the ground and a yellow shadow flashed as it quickly chased after the silver-haired man. After a moment, the place returned to its previous silence. However, the originally intact forest had disappeared and was replaced by a messy scene. Suddenly, a few soft rustling sounds could be heard. Two figures poked out from the waist-high grass one after another. I say, sang Pooh, is the leader crazy? Can't the three of us take care of it quickly? Why do we have to play one-on-one? The majestic man in front spat out the broken grass in his mouth and asked in boredom. Olivier, this is a trial. Pa, the man in the black hooded robe behind reached out and snapped his fingers. The dead leaves and broken grass on his body automatically fell to the ground. The leader may have peaked at the threshold of the void grade and needs some external stimulation. Sang Pooh Oliver. Yes, these two were members of the Dusk Hunter group. As for the silver-haired man just now, it was naturally the leader Yemaw. TSK, this stimulation is enough. Oliver smacked his lips and shook his head. But it's easy to die. Hee, I believe you know better. For a warrior, there's nothing more effective than death to stimulate. Before he finished speaking, Sang Pooh suddenly turned his head and looked towards the southeast. What's wrong? Oh, nothing. I've been feeling uneasy since just now, as if something bad has happened. Oliver laughed when he heard this. Ha, Sang Pooh, you're a space magician. When did you learn to be an astrologer? That direction, could it be that something happened to that wildcat Eunice? Eunice, Sang Pooh suddenly muttered to himself and muttered. Don't worry. Oliver patted Sang Pooh's shoulder casually and said carelessly, it's already the god of light's blessing that she didn't find trouble with others. How could anyone provoke her? That's true. Okay, I'll go with you to find her in 2 days. Anyway, we can't interfere with the leader. Let's go. The leader ran away again. That's the only way. Chapter 362. Author's Note. Bowing to thank readers Old Sun Newbie, Young Man Don't Sigh, because of Tian Xian, and JHD 121 for their tips. Throwing a stone into a lake would cause some ripples, but they would eventually subside. If he lifted a huge rock and threw it in, it would create waves of ripples that would take some time to calm down. If one were to use what happened in Mountain Stream City as an analogy, it would be like an adult dragon getting tired of flying and falling into the lake. A casual twist of its body would cause huge waves. And this was not the end. After playing around for a while, the dragon found that the environment here was not bad, so it decided to settle down. The storm in the city continued to affect the city. It had been a few days since the incident, and the continuous rain had stopped. However, the sky above Mountain Stream City still seemed to be shrouded in a layer of gloomy clouds. The citizens who were out and about would occasionally look at each other, and they would always find a familiar look of panic on each other's faces. The statue of the Mountain Stream Goddess had been erected in the city for hundreds of years. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as one was a citizen of the city, no matter if it was a noble or a commoner, they had all grown up looking at the statue of the goddess. They had never thought that one day the goddess would fall, and so decisively. Even piecing it back together was a delusion. Therefore, whether it was subjective or bystander reasons, it could not stop a rumor from spreading in the city. The rumor was that the Mountain Stream Goddess was angry and would no longer protect the city. This rumor sounded very reasonable, so the people were even more terrified. Compared to the ordinary people of Mountain Stream City, the believers of the Temple of Light were even more angry and sad. Don't forget that the Mountain Stream goddess had another identity, and that was the first holy maiden of the Temple of Light. Now that the statue had collapsed, it was no exaggeration to say that the pillar of faith in the hearts of the believers had also collapsed. The faith of the believers was loyal and fanatical, not to mention that there was a group of fanatics. Therefore, no one knew when or which believer had acted first, but in short, someone had openly committed suicide in front of the statue ruins. This action quickly caused a chain reaction. First, it was a few people, then more than 10 people. They all followed suit. There were many reasons. Some said that it was to leave with the Holy Maiden, while others said that it was to appease the goddess' anger, and so on. Fortunately, the officials of Mountain Stream City reacted quickly this time. Before the situation escalated, large groups of garrison cavalry rushed over and were stationed here. They blocked all the entrances and exits, preventing anyone from entering or exiting the city square. After that, the bishop of the church in the city quickly stood up and vigorously promoted the doctrine of the Temple of Light, which was that true believers were not allowed to commit suicide. With this two-pronged approach, it was not easy to suppress this wave of suicides. At the same time, the aftermath of this disaster continued to follow up. First of all, there were many passers-by at that time, and they were sure that the statue of the goddess had been destroyed by someone. If that was the case, it would be very important to capture these two people. Under such circumstances, the officials of Mountain Stream City once again displayed a rare high efficiency. That afternoon, sketches and portraits were posted all over the city. Just in case, they were also sent to the neighboring cities to ask for help in tracking down the murderer. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the faces of the two murderers were restored in detail. One was a middle-aged man with a cold face, while the other was a charming and beautiful woman. Unfortunately, although many people with similar faces were caught, they were quickly eliminated. A few days later, the real culprit was still nowhere to be found. In fact, if they kept looking according to this map, there would be no results. The middle-aged man was just the image of Tang, in disguise. As long as he took off the prop, who could imagine that this ordinary, harmless young man was him? As for Eunice, that was even more nonsense. Perhaps they could determine Eunice's identity and name, but to find her was undoubtedly delusional. After all, she had already put on the most beautiful dress, and then was directly melted by the dark fog of the netherworld. How could they find her? They couldn't let the god of light greet the devil and then bring her out. Probably seeing that this matter was not effective, the officials of Mountain Stream City made another move, which was to let the scapegoat, the garrison, appear to divert the public's attention. In fact, it was a bit inappropriate to call it a scapegoat, because the garrison did indeed have an unshirkable responsibility. The people also wanted to put them on trial. First of all, there were the dozen or so guards who were present at the time and the cavalry who survived in the end. Needless to say, they were accused of incompetent guards, being greedy for life, and so on. Then, they went through the city's court and were directly locked up in the death row, waiting to be sent to the gallows on Sunday. Next was the garrison chief, Dimpus, and the chief of cavalry, the two highest officials of the organization. Their crime was that they were not strict in supervising their subordinates and were unable to arrive at the scene in time. However, they had a reason to argue, which was to display the corpses of the 15 bounty hunters. Normally, with these corpses, Dimpus and the chief of cavalry would be in the limelight and receive rewards and glory. But now, in order to suppress the public's anger, the chief of cavalry was removed from his position and sent to prison. If there were no accidents, he could only spend the rest of his life in some unknown noble's mine. As for Dimpus, he had to be removed from his position. He also knew that he had been harmed badly by Tangan. What credit was given to him? It was just to divert him and the majority of the garrison cavalry. However, he naturally did not dare to say this and insisted that he had sensed the arrival of the bounty hunters. For the safety of the city, he had mobilized the cavalry to encircle and suppress them. Fortunately, He had a good relationship with the nobles in the city. He had moved around and pulled up a protective net in time. The final result was that he had to spend 1 or 2 years in prison as a punishment for dereliction of duty. This was undoubtedly much better than the cavalry who were sent to the gallows and the chief of cavalry who had to work hard for the rest of his life. Such a swift and decisive trial allowed the nobles and commoners of Mountain Stream City to vent their anger. It also allowed the big shots who were secretly manipulating things to heave a sigh of relief. If it was just an ordinary citizen's protest, they would not care. However, this matter involved the Temple of Light and could not be neglected. While the city's court trial was going on merrily, the Temple of Light was very cooperative and came up with a response strategy. First, the Temple of Light would use the donations of the believers to rebuild the statue of the goddess and promise to invite the big shots of the holy city to give their blessings and prayers. Although no matter how new the statue was, it would not be the same as the one from before. However, through this matter, it did give the people some hope. Secondly, as for the 2 daring fellows, the bishop promised that the Temple of Light would send a special team to track down the culprits. No one doubted the Temple of Light's strength. Now that they had spoken, the people would quietly wait for the day when the 2 damn fellows were caught. The Mountain Stream City officials' public relations for this crisis was rather outstanding. Everything seemed to be done in an orderly manner. Of course, the influence of this matter would not end just because of this. It could even be said that it would not be completely over for a few generations. At this moment, Tang In, who had been cursed by thousands of curses, opened his eyes and woke up in a daze. Chapter 363. Sorry, the Tanuki's tonsils are inflamed. It's a little uncomfortable. I'll start with 4,000 words today. Tang In woke up in a daze. As soon as he opened his eyes, all he could see was a white world. Is this heaven? No. Even if I die, I'll definitely go to hell. Tang In was almost awake now that he could still make this rational judgment. He subconsciously turned his head, and the part of his body that was pulled suddenly felt a sharp pain. He frowned, and the white light in front of him gradually dissipated. The first thing he saw was a square roof with layers of logs as the beams. It was a typical northern architectural style. Looking around, it was just ordinary walls and furniture. There were no extra decorations. It seemed that for ventilation, the east window was slightly opened. The curtains had been blown to one side by the breeze. A dazzling ray of sunlight shone through the window and shone on Tang In's pillow. There was no doubt that this should be the heaven that he had mistakenly thought of. His nose sniffed, and a faint smell of wound cloth and medicine surrounded him. Tang In subconsciously reached out to touch his nose, but then he instantly groaned. He only felt a tingling sensation spreading from his arm to his entire upper body. F***CK. After waiting for the pain to pass, Tang In looked down at his body that was wrapped in layers of wound cloth. He couldn't help but curse in depression. It's only been a few days. How did I turn back into a mummy? Last time it was Sylvia, this time it's Eunice. F***CK. This is an unlucky year. Is this the rhythm of a romantic disaster? After a few rounds of pain and complaining to himself, Tang In finally came back to his senses. There was no one in the house, and he wasn't detained. He should have been saved. Josiah? But then again, the situation at that time was... Tang In's memory had always been good. He slowly pondered and gradually recalled that afternoon. After Tang In saw Eunice die in the corrosive black fog, he sighed a little and turned to leave the shop. At that time, he was dizzy, stumbling, and the injuries on his body had reached the point of no return. Fortunately, he still had a trace of rationality. After walking through the commercial street, he turned and walked into an alley. At that time, Eunice's dagger was still stuck in his chest. Although it wasn't fatal, he couldn't pull it out immediately because the instant blood loss and nerve pain could have made him faint. Naturally, this image couldn't appear in front of people for a long time. So when he appeared in an alley, he should have stolen a carriage to return to the tavern. Then, the next part of his memory was more chaotic. He seemed to have bumped into someone else's carriage and seemed to have gone in the wrong direction until he finally heard a familiar voice, and then it was completely cut off. Was it Josiah? Tang and tried hard to recall. It should be a female voice. At this moment, bang. The door was pushed open from the outside. Done, you're awake. It was a very excited and familiar voice. Tangan didn't need to look at it at all. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Well, I don't have to guess anymore. Thank you to the God of Light. My luck has finally exploded. The person who came in was Josiah. He was holding various kinds of medicine and layers of white wound cloth, as if he was going to treat Tangan's wounds. But when he saw Tangan wake up, his hands trembled and he almost dropped the medicine. Then he quickly put the things in his hands on the table next to him, turned around, and rushed out of the door. What's going on? Tangan blinked in astonishment. Did Eunice also stab my face? While he was guessing, a voice came from outside the door. Done. Wait for a moment. I'll call the doctor. Then it seemed that he suddenly met someone. By the way, you go and bring it over early. Send it to Captain Tangan's room. There was a moment of panic. A moment later, Josiah brought an old man with a white beard into the room. Then Enoch and several other people in charge of the secret organization also rushed over. In fact, Tang En was the clearest about his injuries. With his abnormal physique, as long as he could wake up, it would only be a matter of time before he recovered, regardless of the severity of his injuries. But looking at Josiah's anxious and expectant face, it was naturally not good to refuse. In the end, he let the old man with a white beard examine him slowly. There was no doubt that Tangan's current injuries were naturally serious. Logically speaking, it was not difficult to come to a conclusion. However, the old man with a white hair probed Tangan's chest and touched his left arm. Finally, he pinched his beard and looked very conflicted. In fact, he had already examined Tang several times. The first time, his conclusion was very decisive. It was that there was no cure and he had to prepare for his death. Originally, anyone who saw a body full of wounds, breathing intermittently, and even having a dagger in his chest would come to such a conclusion. But at that time, Josiah insisted on removing the dagger from Tangan's body and bandaging his wounds. The old man with a white beard did not object. First of all, even if he was going to be buried, he had to pay attention to the dignity. It was undoubtedly inappropriate to bury him with a dagger. Second, he understood Josiah's thoughts. After all, everyone hoped for a miracle to happen. Of course, in the old man's opinion, such a miracle was impossible. But who knew that just one night later, Josiah, who had been waiting for him, suddenly came over and said excitedly that Tangan's breathing had returned to normal. Naturally, the old man did not believe this. In his opinion, with Tangan's condition, he would at most hold on for half a night before he stopped breathing, let alone show any signs of recovery. So, he only thought that Josiah was agitated. But although he did not think much of it, the old man still went with him. After all, Josiah was the highest person in charge of the organization. He still had to give face to him. Then, when the old man really saw Tangan's condition, he was a little stunned. Yes, Josiah did not lie to him. Not only was Tang En not dead, but his breathing had also stabilized. If one excluded the external injuries on his body, it would even look like he was sleeping from afar. The old man's first thought at that time was that a big shot from the Temple of Light had taken action. But of course, that was just a thought. A clergyman who could save a life was not someone they could come into contact with. Moreover, Tangan's internal and external injuries were still there. Now he was just breathing steadily. After checking again, the old man cautiously made a second judgment. He expressed that he was still not optimistic and gave an explanation. He said that Tangan's breathing was stable now. It might be because he was strong enough to forcibly hold on to his last breath. But his internal and external injuries were too serious. There was no way to treat him at all. Not long after, when this breath passed, all the suppressed injuries would suddenly erupt. At that time, it would be the end of his life. This explanation was very detailed and sounded very reasonable, but the results were often unexpected. After another day, Tang En was still alive and well. Not only was his breathing still stable, even the external injuries on his body had begun to heal at an astonishing speed. The old man with the white beard was completely speechless. Was this guy still human? This was not F asterisk King medical. In fact, the old man who was a little crazy did secretly pierce Tang En's arm and then observe what color his blood was. It was rumored that demons had an extremely strong recovery ability, which was inextricably linked to their purple blood. Of course, this was a farce. But after several examinations, the old man did not come to any conclusions. There was no other way. If he came to a conclusion again, not only would others not believe him, even he himself would doubt himself. Because of the old man's hesitation, the room fell into silence. In the end, probably sensing the awkwardness of the atmosphere, Josiah hurriedly came out to smooth things over. He picked up a sumptuous breakfast and let Tang En eat. The old man with the white beard took the opportunity to say that his body was recovering and that he needed to rest more. After that, he wiped his forehead and hurriedly left. But the problem soon arose. Tang En could not move his hands now, so he could not eat breakfast at all. Josiah was stunned for a moment. Then he turned around and looked at the several main people in charge of the secret organization behind him. Enoch was good at reading people's expressions. He first reacted quickly and greeted Tang En, then found an excuse to wave his hand and ask everyone to leave. Of course, there were a few young people who were unwilling to leave, but when they saw Josiah's tense face, they had no choice but to leave. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Tang En looked at Josiah, who was pretending to be calm, a little amused. Then he remained silent. Of course, he would not refuse what happened next, few. After everyone left, Josiah's face suddenly relaxed. He then began to use a knife and fork to deal with the bread, meat, and so on the plate. Since they were all acquaintances, Josiah naturally did not hesitate. He first carefully helped Tang En lie down and then personally fed him breakfast. The golden sunlight shone through the window and shone on the white quilt. It was a little warm and a little hot. A young man was leisurely lying on the bed. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and he seemed to be in a good mood. Beside him, a young girl was carefully cutting up the food. Then, she leaned forward and raised her fork to deliver the food to him. Putting everything else aside, if Xiao Weian were to see this scene, she would probably sigh with regret about retribution. However, there was a slight difference. Sylvia was speechless and angry at that time, while Tang En's expression was one of enjoyment. After the initial awkwardness, Josiah began to talk about what happened after Tang En fell unconscious. After Tang En chased after Ji Li, Josiah watched the encirclement and was uneasy. In the end, she simply explained to Enoch and went to the city alone. She was lucky. Just when she heard about the chaos in the city and rushed over, she saw Tang En driving the horse carriage, making several turns and bumping into other people. After saving Tang En, Josiah also knew about the destruction of the Mountain Creek goddess statue. He did not dare to delay and hurriedly returned to the tavern. As he packed his things, he ordered people to inform Enoch and the rest who were lying in ambush to withdraw from the city. They reacted quickly. Not long after they left Mountain Creek City, the city gates were completely sealed. They were now in Grand City. The secret organization here had been destroyed. If they hid here, it would not be easy for people like the Dusk Hunter group to find them. The next thing to do was to save Tang En. It was worth mentioning that he had been unconscious for 3 days. I was unconscious for 3 days? Tang En opened his mouth in shock. Other than the after effects of the ghostly body, this was definitely the most serious injury he had ever suffered. However, after thinking about it, he felt relieved. Was Eunice easy to get along with? It was already good enough that he could keep his life. Josiah nodded, then raised his head and laughed. You made the old doctor very embarrassed, Huh? Raising his head and laughing, Tang En did not need to think to know what kind of impact his abnormal physique would have on the old doctor. So you have to thank me. Josiah patted his collar and tried to look as if he had done a great service. Without me, you would have been put into a coffin. Yes, and your left hand would have been chopped off. Tang En was surprised. Wait, why did you chop off my left hand? Because your left hand was completely crippled at that time. The old doctor suggested to cut off that part, Otherwise, it might lead to bad changes in other parts. Is that so? Well, tell me, where does the doctor live? I want to find a chance to have a good chat with him. Uh-huh. Josiah was stunned at first, then looked at Tangen's face that was pretending to be murderous, and could not help but lean over the bed and laugh. You're so easily amused. Tangen glanced at him and made a disdainful look at first, but then he put away his expression and said solemnly, Thank you, Josiah. Cough, cough. Josiah seemed to be shocked by Tangen's attitude, and his laughter stopped quickly. As a result, his breath turned into a cough, and his face turned red. Why are you thanking me so inexplicably? I asked you to help, but you ended up with such a serious injury. I'm not talking about this. Tangen shook his head and looked straight into Josiah's eyes. I'm saying thank you for taking care of me for the past 3 days. Although Josiah was very active now, and the smile on his face did not disappear. With Tangen's eyesight, he could naturally catch the trace of fatigue that was unconsciously revealed. Besides, there was an even more obvious sign, which was that the originally clear eyes were now covered with short blood vessels, which really made people sigh in pity. Needless to say, during the 3 days when Tangen was unconscious, Josiah must have been by his side at all times. Well, it's what I should do. Josiah subconsciously avoided Tangen's gaze, and his fingers unconsciously clenched the knife and fork. He then changed the topic. Oh, by the way, I still don't know how Eunice is doing. Do you still need to ask? Tangen raised his eyebrows. Since I'm lying here, she naturally has to be lying on the ground. Yeah, Tangen, well done. Although he had vaguely guessed it in his heart, Josiah was still excited when he got the confirmation from Tangen. In this way, the bounty hunters who destroyed 7 secret organizations and killed hundreds of Gray Coat Army members were all executed, which was very satisfying. After chatting for a while, the breakfast food that was brought over was quickly devoured by Tangen. It's not enough. I'll prepare more. Josiah put the plate aside and was about to get up. Forget it. It's not suitable to eat too much now. Tangen shook his head gently, and then his eyes flashed. Josiah, I had an interesting dream when I was unconscious, and I still remember it roughly. Do you want to hear it? Okay. Josiah nodded and sat by the bed again. Have you seen the beach? My dream happened on the beach by the sea. Looking from afar, there was an endless stretch of fine white sand, and the sky was blue. A few seabirds were singing, and it seemed empty and sparse. You walked on the beach gently, and the soles of your feet felt a little numb, but it didn't prick you. It was warm, but not hot, and you couldn't help but lie down. He deliberately slowed down his tone, which was low and had a different kind of charm. People couldn't help but be deeply immersed in the beautiful scenery described. Josiah naturally trusted Tangen, so he was quickly immersed in it. Then, his head swayed a few times, and he fell into a deep sleep at the side of the bed. Tangen smiled when he saw this, and then he leaned against the bed, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Chapter 364. After all, Tangen had not recovered from his serious injuries. He had only eaten and chatted for a while, but he already felt an unstoppable sense of exhaustion coming over him. When he opened his eyes again, the light in the room was slightly dim. Judging from the light coming in from the window, it should be afternoon. Turning his head, Josiah, with her golden brown hair spread out, was lying beside him. She had not woken up yet. She had probably unconsciously found the most comfortable sleeping position. Her upper body was lying on the side of the bed, and her beautiful face was very close to Tangen's shoulder. Tangen had never observed Josiah's face so closely. She looked a little soft in her sleep, and lacked some of her resolute and courageous temperament. Her facial features were not very delicate, and they were above average. But when they were put together, it was as if there was a chemical change, and there was a natural beauty. Her brows suddenly furrowed, and she looked a little tired, as if she was worried about something. It made people want to protect and pity her. Sigh. Tangen sighed softly, but he felt a little warm in his heart. As he had observed before, Josiah had not slept or rested for the past 3 days. coupled with the constant worry, fear, and so on. Even a mage with strong mental strength could not withstand it. Suddenly, with an unconscious moan, Josiah, who was sleeping, suddenly moved her body. Her curled-up hair brushed past Tang's chin, and then her pink tongue circled around his lips, and she deftly retracted it again. Feeling the slight itch on his chin, Tang first subconsciously leaned back, but when he lowered his head, he could not help but look at Josiah's lips. After a pause, he slowly approached. Her lips were not thin or thick, and her lips were well-defined. The color was not dark or light, and the luster was natural. And because her pink tongue had just brushed it, there was a little seductive moisture on it. Gulp. Huff, huff. Tang swallowed hard and leaned back abruptly. His face was slightly hot, and his chest was heaving up and down rapidly. He took a few deep breaths and looked as if he couldn't wait to reach out and touch his nose awkwardly. I can't. We're too familiar with each other. I can't do it at all. Shaking his head, he glanced at the sleeping Josiah once more and closed his eyes. Forget it. Let's just retreat. This kind of vulgar thing doesn't match my noble character, killer system. In a flash, Tang appeared in the space hall. This time, there weren't any beautiful or profound scenes. It was just an ordinary hall. The old butler was lying on a rocking chair not far away. The tea in his hand was as steady as a mirror as he quietly looked at the screen in front of him. Just as Tang was about to step forward and wave to greet them, the system's synthesized voice rang out. Obtained 50 blood chi, obtained 100 blood chi, obtained 100 blood chi, obtained 10,000 blood chi. Ding, congratulations on leveling up. Obtained special effect, elementary creation. The system was a little rigid. These blood chis had to be reported one by one. Usually, Tang would turn a deaf ear to it and just open the killer panel to take a look. But this time, before he could do anything, a blood chi value of 10,000 shocked him directly. After pausing for a moment, Tang blinked and opened the panel. Blood chi value, 24500/50,000 blood chi level. Level 6 special effect, 6-fold increase, advanced deterrence, advanced defense penetration, advanced explosion, intermediate invasion, elementary creation. Eunice, Tang, and rubbed his nose. He clearly remembered that the last time he looked at the blood chi, it was only 14,000. It was still far from leveling up. But now, not only did it level up, but it had also reached 24,000. Without a doubt, such a huge value could only be brought about by killing the Earth-rank high-ranking martial artist, Eunice. Since the blood chi level had leveled up, there would naturally be changes in the special effects. Apart from explosion and invasion, which had both leveled up, the biggest change was undoubtedly the addition of an inexplicable elementary creation. There was no text explanation for special effects. If he did not understand, he naturally had to ask the old butler. Tang waved his hand to disperse the panel and walked over. From another angle, he found that the screen was playing the process of his battle with Eunice. Watching his own battle from a bystander's point of view, it inevitably felt strange. On the screen, Tang and Eunice's battle had come to an end. Tang successfully used the bone shrinkage skill to dodge the pincer attack of the wind blades. He gently pierced his dagger through Eunice's uneven dagger shadows and stabbed into her heart. The scene froze. Eunice had a shocked and desperate expression, while Tang's mouth was slightly curled, the angle of his smile a little wider. "How is it, old butler? What do you think of my battle?" Tang raised his head confidently, his face full of dominance. The old butler looked at the screen and nodded lightly. He said thoughtfully, "This smile is really wretched. No wonder. F***. Do you have good eyesight? This is called a smile full of satisfaction. Okay?" Tang was angry and directly interrupted the old butler's words. At that time, he painstakingly calculated and risked his life to finally succeed. So, can't he show a knowing smile? And, after pondering for a while, the old butler seemed to be puzzled and asked, "For you, wretched and full of satisfaction, is there a difference?" Tang and opened his mouth and silently took out his dagger. He waved it and shouted, "A warrior prefers death to humiliation. Come on one. If we don't decide life and death today, I will die once in front of you." There was no other way. Except for being erased by the system, Tang Yin would not really die in the space. You misunderstood what I meant. The old butler held the teacup and did not care about Tang Yin's clamor. I didn't question your character. I remember you also said that wretchedness is not a compliment for an assassin. Tang Yin carefully glanced at the old butler's expression to determine whether the other party was using this as an excuse to attack him. After a pause, the old butler slowly took a sip of tea. His expression was still indifferent. But you actually have such a big reaction to this. It seems that your character, that old butler. Tang Yin quickly changed the topic and instantly showed a curious expression. What does the good fortune in the blood special effect mean? The old butler did not insist and explained, "The good fortune now for you is to speed up the healing of your body's injuries." Heal. Tang Yin was overjoyed. His abnormal physique healed his injuries quickly. With the healing effect of this good fortune, wouldn't it be like adding wings to a tiger? TSK, was he really going to evolve into an unkillable cockroach? By the way, you seem to be talking about the good fortune now. What about the future? Tang Yin was not completely overwhelmed by joy and sensitively grasped the key word. The future will be a little complicated. The old butler put down the teacup. You can probably say that it's a transformation. You're still far from that step. It's not clear now. You'll know when you experience it for yourself in the future. Modification, Tang Yin muttered to himself, feeling somewhat uneasy. That was because the term sounded like it had something to do with machinery. However, Tang Yin immediately felt relieved. There was no point in thinking too much about it. Special effects were not skills. If he did not use them, he would not be able to level up. It could be said that as long as the blood energy was upgraded, the special effect might be upgraded as well. Since there was no way to stop it, he could only accept it passively. After all, at least now, there was a nature-defying accelerated healing effect. Okay, now let's focus back on the screen. The old butler turned his head and waved his hand. The scene on the screen was replayed again. Hey! Tang Yin touched his nose and said angrily, "Do you have to bite me and not let go?" The old butler said calmly, "Although it's not wrong to say that a person who wants to do something improper while others are resting is wretched, but I'm not that bored." F***CK. Tang Yin's face was burning. He was ashamed for the first time. He shouted in exasperation, "How dare you, peep? You're old and disrespectful. Be careful that you don't grow a needle's eye." The old butler was not angry and responded calmly, "Your eyes are my window. Didn't you already know this? How can you say that I peep?" Tang Yin opened his mouth and suddenly found that he had no words to defend himself. Yes, when he first came into contact with the system, the old butler told him about this. He did not think much of it at that time. He was even happy to get a lot of convenience, such as the camera rotation and so on. But now, when the old butler took the opportunity to make things difficult, Tang Yin found that this was a F***king trap, a huge trap. Now he had no privacy to speak of. Hey, old butler. Tang Yin quickly put away his angry expression and moved closer to please him. This problem must be solved. Otherwise, no matter what he did in the future, wouldn't he have to bring along a strengthened version of Edison? I told you, I'm not that bored. The old butler certainly knew what Tang Yin was thinking and shook his head directly. However, seeing that Tang Yin obviously did not believe him, the old butler could not help but frown and pointed to the screen. Okay, don't change the topic if you don't want to continue to be hunted down. It's obviously you who is changing the topic. After a casual glance, Tang Yin's face suddenly changed. He then moved closer and stared at the screen carefully. The screen froze again. This time, the picture was of Eunice waving her right hand and slapping Tang Yin away. Her right hand was disabled and naturally had no strength, so Tang Yin did not care at that time. But now, in the frozen picture, there was clearly a diamond-shaped object in Eunice's palm. It looked like a leaf or a crystal, flashing with a faint black light. "What's this?" Tangen's face was a little ugly because he suddenly remembered the inexplicable words Eunice said before she died. "Leader and the others will not let you go. Then you'd better hide quickly. They will find you soon." "Sorry, I don't know. It's not in the existing knowledge system." The old butler spread his hands. "But looking at this shape, and it should be something like a magic item. You can look for the woman outside." Before he finished speaking, the old butler suddenly waved his hand, and the screen immediately changed. Tangen on the side was also shocked and looked at the screen in an instant. The picture was of Tangen's body outside. On his left shoulder, a black mark suddenly appeared. The shape of the mark was like an eye, and there were several runes rotating around it. The pupil was like a black diamond flashing with a cold light, as if it was mocking and cursing. Chapter 365. Towering mountains and lofty ridges, high and low. Winding mountain roads, endless. At this time, two rather strangely dressed people were walking on the mountain road. One of them was wearing a long black robe, revealing only his body below the nose. It could be seen that he seemed to be a little anxious, and his mouth kept muttering something. The other person was an extremely burly man, wearing clothes made of various kinds of animal skins, looking rather barbaric and domineering. But even more domineering was the burly man's muscular shoulders, carrying a huge beast covered in long golden hair that looked like a lion or tiger. "Hey, Sang-Poo, can you stop muttering? Eunice will be fine." The burly man wiped the sweat from his forehead, his face full of helplessness. "Besides, didn't you give her the eye of space? If she can't sense it now, doesn't that mean she's fine? What do you know?" Sang-Poo seemed a little anxious, his tone extremely rude. "Even if I use the eye of space, I still can't sense it if it's not within a certain range." After a pause, Sang-Poo thumped his hands. "No, Oliver. We have to speed up and use short-distance teleportation." There was no doubt that these two people were the members of the Twilight Hunter group who had just come out of the jungle, Sang-Poo and Oliver. Leader Yimal wanted to use external stimulation to break through to the realm of void, so he had been challenging powerful magical beasts recently. Sang-Poo and Oliver were responsible for finding such magical beasts for him and clearing them out. After all, not every powerful magical beast traveled alone. In fact, more often than not, they had many underlings. The few of them had known each other for many years, so there was naturally no problem with this division of labor and cooperation. But for some reason, Sang-Poo had been very uneasy these days, and always felt that something must have happened to Eunice. There was no basis for it, just pure intuition. It just so happened that Yimal had some gains after killing the lion-tiger-like beast, and needed to rest and digest them. So Sang-Poo and Oliver immediately walked out of the jungle and went to the city. No. After hearing about short-distance teleportation, Oliver hurriedly waved his hand to refuse, and then shrugged the lion-tiger-like beast on his shoulder. "You're joking with your life. Don't forget, we still have this big guy." Short-distance teleportation was a favorite spell for spatial mages. It didn't require any complicated magic array to support it. All they needed to do was recite the incantation, and they could instantly appear a few kilometers ahead. Of course, this was not without restrictions. Because there were no other aids, there were requirements on the number of people teleported, weight, and so on. Of course, Sang-Poo had no problem teleporting by himself. If he brought Oliver along, he could manage it. However, with the addition of that gigantic beast, it was completely impossible. Magic was a delicate job, and spatial magic was especially so. If one were to violate the rules, being banished to a barren space and never being able to get out was something one could imagine. If that was the case, wouldn't it be fine to just abandon the giant beast? Naturally, that would not do. Not to mention the fact that it took a few days to finally kill it. Just the fact that this demonic beast had strength that was not inferior to the Earth rank meant that its entire body was a treasure. If it was auctioned, it would be a shocking amount of wealth. Naturally, they could not just throw it away. "Calm down," Oliver comforted as he held the giant beast's body. It's not like you don't know Eunice's strength. Besides, even if she encountered an expert, with her speed, if she wanted to escape, who could stop her? Hmm, that makes sense, that makes sense. Sang Poo muttered unconsciously. Suddenly, he looked up at the sky. It's about time. Let me try to sense it again. Oliver slapped his forehead, speechless. He then gave up and waved his hand. All right, go ahead and sense it. Use up the 3 chances you have today, and you'll be able to rest a little. From his tone, it seemed that there was a limit to the number of times he could sense it. Yes, Sangpu nodded, his pale and slender hands stretched out from under the black robe. He took a deep breath, and his palms flashed, constantly changing hand signs in front of his chest. Sense it here? Oliver opened his mouth and revealed a stunned expression. He then grabbed his hair and looked around. Shaking his head, it didn't matter anymore. The two of them were now in the middle of the canyon, with steep peaks on both sides. In terms of terrain, it was really a good place to set up an ambush and rob. In fact, there was indeed a group of bandits lying in ambush nearby. Originally, when they saw that the two of them seemed to be warriors, they didn't intend to rob them. After all, those who dared to walk alone or in small groups in the barren mountains more or less had some strength. The main reason was that they didn't bring any luggage. One of them was even wearing animal skin. This was obviously a thankless business. Naturally, no one was willing to do it. But after a moment, the bandit boss was a little hesitant, because one of his sharp-eyed subordinates saw the giant beast on the burly man's shoulder and judged that it should be a golden lion. Golden lion, a mid-level magical beast. This description was enough. As long as it could be called a magical beast, whether it was the fur, claws, or the precious magic core inside, they were all extremely valuable things. Moreover, the golden lion in front of them was in good condition, without any signs of being cut open. Its value was even higher. But then again, how could someone who could kill a mid-level golden lion be easy to deal with? It could be said that at least one of the two people in front of them was a mid-level warrior, or even a peak mid-level warrior. Because there was a widely known point of view in this strange world that magical beasts of the same level were generally stronger than humans. If one didn't have the strength of a higher level, it would be very difficult to suppress them. After thinking for a moment, the bandit boss decided to make a move. As the saying goes, people die in pursuit of wealth, and birds die in pursuit of food. Apui, as the saying goes, wealth comes from danger. Without courage, how could there be production? The bandit boss calculated that although he didn't have any mid-level warriors on his side, he still had a lot of people. As long as he set up bows and arrows on the periphery, the others would surround and delay the other party at the first moment. There was still a high chance that the robbery would succeed. With this thought in mind, the bandit boss didn't hesitate anymore. First, he waited for the archers to get into position. Then he waved his hand fiercely. Kill! A group of bandits waved their swords and rushed down the mountain with a roar. Dust flew up, and a murderous aura surged. However, the two people at the foot of the mountain didn't give him any face. Sangpu was still rapidly changing his hand signs, and there was a light flowing on his fingertips. Occasionally, he would say a few vague words, which should be the so-called incantation. A few drops of sweat could be seen dripping down from his chin. It seemed that this reaction wasn't easy at all. As for Oliver, he was looking left and right. His lips were slightly curled, as if he was interested, and also as if he was amused. The two's abnormal behavior made the bandit boss feel a little uneasy. However, since they had already come out and caused such a big commotion, he couldn't just say that he had mistaken them for someone else and leave. Carefully taking 2 steps forward, the bandit boss began to shout, "Robbery, we are... What do you want?" Oliver waved his hand, interrupting the other party's self-introduction, and asked directly, we want the golden lion." The bandit boss was stunned for a moment. Then he pointed at the giant beast on Oliver's shoulder and stuttered, "Golden lion? Ha!" Oliver raised his eyebrows, his expression somewhat joyful. He then stepped forward, threw the giant beast over his shoulder, and directly threw it out. "Then I'll give it to you." Boom! Dust flew up, and the ground shook slightly. The giant beast landed on the field, and immediately smashed a sizable hole. The bandits looked at each other, stunned. Happiness had come too suddenly, and they couldn't react at all. Success just like that. A mid-level magical beast was in their hands just like that. A few of the bandits watched the majestic Oliver carefully walk forward, approaching the giant beast on the ground. Oliver, on the other hand, seemed very indifferent. He spread his hands and smiled. "Yes, thank you for your cooperation, brother. I thank you in advance." After all, the other party was indeed tactful, and the bandit boss was too embarrassed to say anything more. He even bowed slightly to express his gratitude. At this moment, suddenly, there was a short scream. One of the bandits, who was walking in front of the giant beast, to carry it suddenly changed his expression. He first rubbed his eyes and stared at the giant beast's head. Then he stiffly turned his head and saw the smiling Oliver. Thump, thump, thump. He took a few big steps back and fell to the ground. He still didn't dare to hesitate and turned to crawl backward. His lips trembled, and his tone was as if he had seen a ghost. Three, three-eyed golden lion. Everything had happened so suddenly that the bandits were still confused when they saw the panicked look on their comrade's face. But when they heard the three-eyed golden lion's name, they finally understood. Their expressions changed at the same time, and they all took a few steps back in unison. The bandit boss was no exception. He was extremely shocked, and now he hated the man who had recognized the golden lion. What kind of F***king eyesight was that? Couldn't he tell a three-eyed one from a two-eyed one? The three-eyed golden lion and the golden lion were almost identical in appearance. The only difference was the third eye. The three-eyed golden lion was a variant of the golden lion. When it was born, it was no different from other golden lions. Some were even the same until death. However, if its strength advanced to the Earth stage, then the powerful third eye on its forehead would appear. To put it simply, if you met a golden light lion with three eyes, then its strength would at least be at the Earth stage. If that was the case, then what kind of strength would the person who could kill an Earth-level three-eyed golden lion be? The bandit boss felt his legs go weak just thinking about it. He wanted to turn and run, but he was afraid of angering the other party. After all, with his strength and speed, no matter how unexpected, it would be easy for the other party to kill him. Oliver didn't have any other thoughts. To be honest, the reason he played with these bandits was purely because he was bored and wanted to have some fun. As for killing intent, that was even less of a concern. Just as he was about to wave his hand and tell the other party to scram, suddenly, damn it, a furious roar came from behind Oliver. When he turned around, he saw Sang-Poo, who had been standing there quietly, with his hands wide open. His pale face, which had been hidden all this time, was exposed under the sunlight. His eyes seemed to be burning with a pitch-black flame that seemed to have the power to devour everything. Hiss, 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 a few imperceptible wind whistled past, stirring up the dust on the ground. F***CKU. Oliver's expression changed, and he pulled out a huge battle sword from behind his back. Blue fighting light burst forth, and he used it to block in front of him. Bang, bang, bang. The blue light on the battle sword flickered continuously, as if it had been hit by something. But even if you opened your eyes wide, you wouldn't be able to find any trace of an attack. Chi. Oliver had successfully blocked this seemingly invisible attack, but the bandits more than 10 meters away were obviously unable to do so. They didn't struggle at all, and they didn't even cry out in pain. They only saw their companions' bodies suddenly split into 2, 3, or even more pieces, slowly falling to the ground. Then it was their turn, blood sprayed everywhere, and limbs flew everywhere. This short, ordinary canyon instantly became the cruelest battlefield. Screams began to ring out. Some bandits who had been cut in half didn't die immediately. They stretched out their arms and clung tightly to the ground, unconsciously crawling forward. They didn't know that their innards had fallen to the ground behind them. Fresh blood, broken limbs, slaughter, groans. In just a short second, it began to play out one after another. And all of this was just Sang-Poo venting his dissatisfaction. He didn't even realize that he had killed someone. What's wrong? After blocking the attack, Oliver's expression turned ugly. Of course, he wasn't blaming Sang-Pu. After so many years of being together, he naturally knew that Sang-Pu, who wore a black cloak all day, had a calm personality. Now that he had lost control and attacked without distinguishing between friend and foe, could it be Huff? Perhaps it was because he had used up too much of his mental strength, or because the previous attack had been too fierce. Sang-Pu took a few deep breaths before standing up straight again. His black cloak trembled slightly, and his voice was cold and sorrowful. I sensed the spatial eye that I gave to Eunice. Damn it. Oliver opened his mouth, his expression somewhat stupefied. He tightened his grip on the long battle sword in his hand, and then weakly put it down. The spatial eye was a type of positioning magic tool. If it wasn't used, naturally it couldn't be sensed. If it was used, as long as it was within a certain range, the caster would be able to sense it. No one would play a prank on this kind of thing, so this also meant that their member, Eunice, was indeed dead. Now, they had left the position of their enemy for them to avenge her. Let's go. Oliver no longer looked at the corpse of the three-eyed golden light lion on the ground, and quickly stood beside Sang-Pu. After the latter calmed down, he waved his cane, and with a flash of white light, the two disappeared instantly. Chapter 366. Evening, in the room. I have space. What is that? It's not a thing. Yes, it's a type of high-level magic used to locate or track. Locate or track. F***CK. How do I get rid of it? Can I just dig out this piece of flesh? Of course not. Beside the bed, Josiah, who was in a deep sleep, was also awakened by the magic fluctuation. After he subconsciously said the name of the eye mark, he instantly woke up. Then, under Tangen's questioning, he frowned and thought about the effects of the Eye of Space. Organizing his words, Tang and looked at the slightly glowing mark on his shoulder, his expression ugly and his mood gloomy. The reason why he attacked Eunice back then was because he saw that she was alone. As long as he killed her perfectly, there wouldn't be any problems in the short term. Furthermore, even if the remaining members of the Dust Hunter group found out that it was the Gray Coat Army's doing after investigation, they would have already fled far away and returned to the encampment. But now, it hadn't even been a day since he woke up, and he was being targeted again. Do you have to play me to death before you're satisfied? Perhaps because he had sorted out his thoughts, his nervous mood relaxed slightly. Josiah opened his mouth to comfort him. Don't worry, Tang. The Eye of Space can't pinpoint our exact location. It can only sense an approximate range. Approximate range. Tangen raised his eyebrows and quickly asked, how big is it? After all, it wasn't a magic of his element. Josiah answered hesitantly, I'm not too sure. It depends on how strong the other party is. He paused, as if he thought of something, and continued. If it's the one who set up the teleportation formation during the chaos in the encampment, then he should be at least a great mage. If that's the case, yes, it should be within a range of a few kilometers. A few kilometers. Tang heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. Of course, it was only a little, because as long as the mark was still on his body, he would definitely not be able to get rid of it. It seemed that the other party had finished casting the spell. The mark was gradually fading, and the slight burning sensation on his skin was also cooling down. Tang frowned. Is there no way to get rid of this thing? No. Josiah first shook his head, then a bitter look appeared on his face. As long as we can find another space Grand Magus and ask him to take action, we can immediately get rid of it. Otherwise, we can only wait for it to disappear on its own after a few months. Just pretend I didn't ask. Tang shrugged helplessly. Not to mention the rare spatial magicians. Tang had only seen Josiah and Sessman in the other world for so long. Moreover, even if you found them, why would they be willing to help you? As for waiting for a few months, that was even more nonsensical. Even if he had the life to live for that long. Tell me more about this Eye of Space. For example, what are its weaknesses and limitations? All right. Josiah nodded with a serious expression on his face. The Eye of Space an advanced space-type spell. It was just a spell. As long as it didn't involve any professional content, the introduction wouldn't take too long. Tang had some understanding of this spell from Josiah. First of all, they didn't have to start running now. Although this spell required the caster to be within a certain distance from the target to be able to sense it, the distance was actually very wide. If the other party was a Grand Magus, the distance of the detection just now should be a few hundred kilometers. The other party would at most know a vague direction and wouldn't be able to find it in a short time. Moreover, the transportation in the other world wasn't very convenient. If they took a carriage, it would take at least 2 days to reach Grand City. As for the fact that the other party was a space magus, Josiah had also considered it. Overall, it didn't have much of an impact, because teleportation wasn't a small matter. If they wanted to teleport a few kilometers, it was naturally impossible. The consumption of magic, the fine control of magic, and so on, involved too many problems. If they wanted to teleport a long distance, they would need to build a magic array, which would take a lot of time. In summary, they were still safe at least until tomorrow night. Secondly, this spell also had its flaws. After all, this was a heaven-defying thing that could be sensed from a few hundred kilometers or even 1,000 kilometers away. Therefore, other than not being able to pinpoint the exact location, there was also a limit to the number of times it could sense a day. For a Grand Magus, there would be about 3 or 4 times a day. If the distance was shortened, there would be a few more times. Although this sounded a little less, it was definitely enough. It was an indisputable fact that a space magus could travel faster than others. As long as they could get close to the target, it was almost impossible to be shaken off. Looks like we still have to run. After understanding the effect of the Eye of Space, Tang raised his head and sighed, speechless. Although according to their original plan, they had to run after killing Eunice, there was still time. At least they weren't in a hurry and could calmly wait for his injuries to recover. Now, no matter how he looked at it, they were like stray dogs and the most pathetic kind of people who fled at the sight of the wind. Prepare the carriage. We'll set off for the encampment tomorrow morning. Although it didn't look good on the surface, Tang wasn't someone who cared about such things. If his body was in good condition now, he might even be in the mood to see how many people the other party had when they were running and whether there was a chance for a sneak attack, etc. Now, it was more practical to pack up and run. But your injuries? Josiah opened his mouth slightly, looking hesitant. The distance between here and the encampment wasn't short, and the most important thing now was time. So they definitely wouldn't take a carriage for the journey, but a horse. With such a bumpy ride, Tangen's body full of injuries didn't seem reliable at all. Don't worry, I won't die. Tangen grinned, and then put on a nonchalant look. He wasn't showing off his manliness or anything. He now had the creation's special effect in his hands. And on top of his abnormal physique, his injuries would definitely improve after a night's rest. He didn't expect to be alive and kicking, but it shouldn't be a problem for him to force himself to move. After a brief discussion, Josiah's face was still full of worry, but there really wasn't any good way now, so he could only reluctantly agree in the end. Just then, dinner was sent over. After eating, Tang persuaded Josiah to leave. He didn't dare to waste time, so he quickly activated the creation special effect and lay down to rest. The next day, early in the morning, the sky was slightly bright. Josiah and the others didn't choose to stay in a hotel. Although the secret organization in Grand City was destroyed, a cunning rabbit still had 3 burrows. Not to mention they were in the intelligence business, so it was not a problem for them to find a few empty houses. Be careful, be careful. In the backyard, Josiah held the air with both hands, looking nervous. It was as if she would quickly rescue Tang, if there was anything wrong with him. Don't worry. Not knowing whether to laugh or cry, Tang waved his hand and walked out of the room. He took a deep breath of the morning air, and his spirit was suddenly lifted. Damn, I can finally move. Facts prove that although the creation special effect was only at the beginner level, the effect was indeed extraordinary. After a night, except for a few long and deep wounds, almost all of his external injuries had healed and formed scabs. Of course, the abnormal physique contributed to this, even accounting for more than half of it. However, the creation special effect was undoubtedly one of the contributors, and the healing potential was undoubtedly much greater than the abnormal physique. Although Tang couldn't fight with others now, he could still move around in a small area. As for riding a horse, he could barely support it. However, this was, of course, unimaginable to Josiah. She thought that Tang didn't want others to worry, so he pretended to be smiling, but secretly gritted his teeth and endured it. He was really a tragic character. Naturally, Tang couldn't explain the inside story, so he could only smile bitterly and shake his head when he looked at Josiah's expression, tacitly agreeing to this tough guy's image of a good person. There weren't many people who returned to the base with them, only about 20 or so, and they were all the higher-ups of the secret organization. The rest of the people went into hiding, stopped all publicity, and entered a period of dormancy. His footsteps suddenly stopped, and Tang subconsciously touched his left shoulder. Josiah's eyes flashed, and she looked over with her mouth slightly open. There was a sudden burning sensation under his clothes. The corners of Tang's mouth twitched slightly, and he smiled faintly. "Haha, you woke up early, but I have to go now." Without a doubt, it was the eye of space flashing again. Although Tang didn't know where the space magician was now, as long as their journey wasn't delayed, they should be able to return to the base first if they traveled day and night. At that time, it would be fine if the other party didn't follow them, but if they did, Tang wouldn't mind asking Zwafan to make them stay. After passing through the courtyard at the back and passing through the main room, they would reach the entrance. The sound of hooves hitting the ground could be heard from outside. It was very clear and crisp. At this moment, all of a sudden, thump, thump, thump. Hurried footsteps could be heard from the front. Something big has happened. What should we do? What should we do? Repeating the words like a neurotic, Enoch walked out of the main room in a hurry, clutching a newspaper tightly in his hand. His face was a little pale, and he looked a little panicked. Tang frowned, and he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. He knew Enoch. He was Bosco's younger brother. Although he didn't have much contact with him, from his words and actions, Tang could still see that he was adhering to the fine traditions of his family, and they were all masters of calculation. If such a person showed panic on the surface, it would either be an act, or he was really frightened compared to Tang. Josiah knew Enoch's character better, so he quickly asked, "Uncle Enoch, what's wrong?" Base. Sigh, take a look for yourselves." After hesitating a few times, Enoch gave up dejectedly, shook his head, and directly handed the newspaper over. Josiah took it and opened it. Tang glanced at it from the side, blinked, and glanced again. The gray robes thieves' nest has finally appeared, and the army is immediately surrounding and suppressing it. Phew! He took a deep breath, squatted down, and grabbed his head with both hands. Damn it! Just let me faint. Chapter 367. The North was not peaceful these days. All kinds of shocking news were like the tides of the sea. Before the first wave subsided, another wave rose. In the end, the next wave was directly smashed to death on the beach. Let's not talk about the war in the North. Let's take the recently chaotic cities as an example. A few days ago, a high-class banquet held in Hansui City was infiltrated by the wild cult. In the end, countless nobles and rich merchants were killed. In the end, before the news spread completely, 3 days ago, the Mountain Creek City, known as the Holy City of the North, in the city square, the Mountain Creek goddess statue in the city square, which was the statue of the first-generation saintess of the Temple of Light, was destroyed in broad daylight. Well, if you think that's the end of the shocking news, you're sorely mistaken. On a certain day in the autumn of the year 555 of the Brand calendar, a piece of news occupied the headlines of many tabloids in the North. The title might be different, but the general idea was the same. It was the Gray Coat Army that had not stopped recently. They had finally found their nest. The details of how they found it were also stated. It was very official. Under the tireless efforts of the North Military Prison, They saw through the other party's layers of disguise and finally succeeded in finding the nest of the Greycoat Army. In fact, over the years, the Brand government had discovered the main forces of the Greycoat Army many times, but sometimes they chose to ignore them. Sometimes, when they were in the mood and felt that they should suppress them, they would send the army to the mountains and mountains to capture them. The most important one should be the one half a year ago when the soldiers of the three major legions were sent out. From the looks of it, the reason why the Bran Empire chose to encircle and suppress them at that time was probably because they had predicted the intention of the northern wilderness to attack in advance, so they wanted to clean up the trouble first. However, no matter how they discovered, cleaned up, or encircled and suppressed them, it did not cause a commotion like this. The location of the discovery alone occupied the headlines of most of the cities in the north. There was naturally a reason for this. It cannot be ruled out that it was because of the recent publicity of the Greycoat Army. They kept slapping the tabloids in the face, which provoked them to kick them when they were down. However, the most important reason was that the Greycoat Army had built a city. Yes, you didn't read it wrong. Even though many nobles and commoners rubbed their eyes subconsciously when they saw this, they couldn't change the words written in black and white. Build a city? The Greycoat Army had built a city. It had to be said that all these years, the Greycoat Army gave people the impression that they were homeless and on the run. Then, it was very likely that this impression would continue. But now, everything had changed. Without anyone knowing, a city built by the Greycoat Army had risen from the barren mountains. There wasn't much description of the city in the newspaper. It seemed like they didn't know the specific situation, so they just described it as a bandit stronghold. Of course, this was not the truth. In the eyes of those in the know, this city named Dawn was not inferior to the northern cities in terms of scale. In fact, it was even superior in some aspects. No matter how big the city was, it was absolutely forbidden in the eyes of the Bran officials. A city was a symbol of governance. Only the Empire had the right to build or abandon it. Therefore, if it was something else, the Bran Empire wouldn't take the initiative to take care of the Greycoat Army because of the intense battle at the front line. But now it was different. At the end of a newspaper, it said that the Empire's military had gathered tens of thousands of soldiers and were on their way to the Greycoat bandits' lair. The attitude was very optimistic. It said that in a few days they would be able to flatten the city and wipe out the Greycoat bandits. This attitude was naturally difficult to convince people, but this guess wasn't all nonsense. If the Greycoat Army was still the same as before, when they were surrounded, they would scatter and run around the mountains. Then these tens of thousands of soldiers would be useless. In the end, it would be the same as usual. But now that the Greycoat Army had built a city and defended it, the situation was very different. In some people's hearts, the difference between the Greycoat Army and a motley crew wasn't that big. Even if they thought highly of the Greycoat Army, how could a commoner's combat quality be better than a regular soldier's? Therefore, in their opinion, as long as they fought a tough battle, the Greycoat Army would be defeated without a doubt. And this was also a lesson learned. When the Greycoat Army was first established, the previous leader of Rosa led a group of people and attacked a Bran city. What was the result? The city was destroyed and the people were killed. Even the Greycoat Army was almost disbanded. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, most people felt that the Greycoat Army had made an absolutely terrible move this time. Their future was dark. The only difference was how many days they could hold on. There were different opinions and discussions. However, this war hadn't been fought yet. It was just talk now. It didn't have much meaning and impact. Of course, this had a huge impact on Tang In and the rest. It was like a bolt from the blue. To be honest, it was expected that the city of Dawn would be discovered and attacked. It was just a matter of time. But the problem that Tang In and the rest were facing now was this sooner or later. After all, Tang Un had only found out about the Eye of Space yesterday evening. Now that he was planning to run away, he ended up here. The base had been attacked. The surrounding area must have been marked as a military zone and occupied by the military personnel. Not to mention that Tang In was injured. Even if he was in perfect condition, He could only pinch his nose in the face of tens of thousands of soldiers. He was completely helpless. There was no way to escape and no way to hide. What did it mean that misfortunes never came singly? What did it mean that when it rains, it pours? This was what it meant. Therefore, it was no wonder that Tang wailed. Let me faint. He had only been awake for a short while, but these two things had already hit him in the head. After a period of depression, the escape plan was automatically canceled. The 20 people returned to the room and sat in a daze. After a while, Josiah took a deep breath. Everyone, what should we do about this? No one spoke. Some people secretly looked at Tang. Besides Josiah, no one knew about the destruction of the goddess statue in Mountain Stream City. This matter was too serious. If it was leaked, it would definitely implicate many people. Of course, people like Enoch would naturally speculate as well. But at least on the surface, no one knew. Therefore, Josiah's explanation last night was that Tang had offended a space mage and needed to avoid him. Therefore, everything was focused on Tang. To put it bluntly, even if there was the Eye of Dimension, it was on Tang. If he escaped, no one would be in any danger. Of course, this was a little extreme. After all, Tang had just helped them eliminate all the bounty hunters without losing a single person. What else could they do? Tang thought about it and shook his head helplessly. He stood up. Let's continue escaping. This time, I'll do it alone. Chapter 368. Author's note. 5,000 words per chapter. A raccoon's throat can't recover. The doctors in my hometown are too lousy. I have to go to the county town tomorrow. How depressing. Grand City, North City Gate. The sky had just brightened, and the city gate had just opened. There were very few people at this time. Most of them were carriages with the logo of the Chamber of Commerce. Occasionally, there would be some ordinary carriages mixed in. They must have something urgent to leave the city. However, although it was early in the morning, the level of surveillance here was much higher than before. The soldiers guarding the city checked almost all the carriages and looked at everyone. Of course, the occasional noble's carriage was an exception. The reason was not hard to imagine. In fact, as long as the passers-by looked up, they would find the answer on the city wall. There were two portraits of a middle-aged man and an enchanting woman. Although the news of the Gray Coat Army building a city was a shock, the destruction of the Mountain Creek goddess statue would not be over so quickly. Moreover, Grand City and Mountain Creek City were neighboring cities. In order to prevent these two from escaping, they naturally had to be on guard. At this moment, 50 meters away from the city gate, an ordinary carriage turned out from the fork in the road and slowly stopped by the side of the road. All right, send me here. The ordinary-looking coachman glanced at the city gate and said softly. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and Josiah, in a white robe, appeared. His expression was calm and complicated. I can accompany you to the next city, rubbing his nose, Tang shrugged. You can, but there's no need for that, right? Josiah was silent. The situation was very clear now. Tang carried the space I and could not return to the base. He could only run around in the remaining time. If someone was with him, they would undoubtedly be implicated as well. As for resisting, it was basically impossible. Although he did not know how many people came, even if it was only the spatial mage, Josiah, and the rest would not be able to resist. Therefore, Tang could only choose to travel alone. Do not misunderstand. There was no meaningless thought of sacrificing himself for others. No matter how many people there were now, other than increasing the chances of being discovered, there was no other use. On the contrary, if it was only Tang alone, it would not be easy for the other party to quickly find him within a few kilometers through his superb disguise skills. Don't think too much. Although he did not turn his head, Tang certainly knew what Josiah was thinking. This has nothing to do with you. It's my bad luck. Well, maybe some god in this world doesn't like me. Previously, when he said that he was fleeing alone in the courtyard, everyone anxiously tried to dissuade him. After all, no matter what, Twain was still one of them. Furthermore, he had just helped them. Logically speaking, they couldn't just watch Twain throw his life away. Josiah didn't say anything. Later, when Tang had made up his mind, Josiah, climbed into the carriage and said he would see him off. After that, he fell silent again. Such behavior was naturally not because Josiah did not care about Tangan. This period of silence was because Josiah was entangled in his own powerlessness. His good friend was in trouble, and not only could he not help, he might even become a burden. No one would feel good about this feeling. Biting his lips, Josiah lowered his face and hid it under his golden brown hair. Say, if I didn't ask you to come, he opened his mouth and interrupted. Say, if I didn't kill Goshawk in the beginning, would this not have happened? Say, if I didn't come this time and you were killed by Eunice, would I come to avenge you? It's completely meaningless. Shaking his head, Tang seemed to be very disapproving. You would come, I said you would come to avenge me, right? Tang was stunned at first, then patted his head and said helplessly, Please, sister, listen to the main point of my words. Josiah saw Tang, pretending to be speechless, and forced a chuckle. Then he took a deep breath. Then what are you going to do next? Are you going to flee like this? Ahem, this is called a strategic shift. After correcting himself in time, Tang narrowed his long and narrow eyes. How can it always be like this? There will always be a counterattack. Well, if you push me too far, let's see who dies first. You have an idea? Josiah was overjoyed when he heard this. Simply fleeing and having a purpose were two different things. The latter was more reassuring. Shaking his head, Tang spread his hands and smiled. How is that possible? I'm not a demon with full intelligence. Well, I just have a vague idea, and I need your help. No problem, tell me. Josiah nodded without hesitation. She just resented herself because she couldn't help. Now that she knew that she still had some use, she was naturally happy. How about this? You go back to Mountain Stream City first, and then, after a series of instructions, Josiah kept nodding. After asking a few questions, his eyes gradually lit up. That's all for now. Well, be careful. Don't force yourself. Understood, don't worry. Josiah nodded confidently, then bit his lips, as if he was thinking about something. Tangan didn't care. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he smiled. That's good. It's all up to you. Well, it's getting late. If you don't leave now, it'll be a tragedy if you get caught in the wild. Well, before he finished speaking, Tang was stunned. The white robe in front of him flashed, and his body couldn't help but lean back, his left and right hands supporting the frame of the carriage. And then his lips were full of softness. I'm being pushed back? Yes, just as Tang said goodbye, Josiah suddenly rushed out of the carriage and kissed him directly. It was true that Tangon's reaction was fast, but now that he was seriously injured, he could only lean back instinctively. And this time, a rather humiliating posture appeared. Wow! Clap, clap, clap. Exclamations, followed by warm applause. There were few people in the morning, but it didn't mean that there was no one. This place was only a few dozen meters away from the city gate, and it was a necessary route, so there were still many people who saw the scene on the carriage. In the morning fog, a girl with long golden hair stepped forward, leaned forward, and held the man's waist with one hand, and put the other hand on his shoulder, and lowered her head to kiss him. This scene seemed to be switched, but in fact, Josiah was concerned about Tangan's injury, but it looked really domineering. Promise me, you must survive. If I don't promise, are you going to continue like this? Since he couldn't return to the station now, Tang naturally wouldn't ride a horse and suffer. After this charming episode at the city gate, he drove the carriage away briskly. Needless to say, this would definitely be a journey on the edge of the abyss. Tang never lacked confidence, but in fact, many things couldn't be solved by confidence alone. Among the remaining members of the Twilight Hunter group, Tang knew of two people. One was Oliver, who should be at the high level of the Earth stage like Eunice. If Tang wasn't injured, he could probably fight with the power of his upgraded blood. In terms of pure strength, he might be at a disadvantage, but in a real battle, it was hard to say. After all, there were many factors that determined the outcome. Just like Eunice, didn't she die in the hands of Tang, who was weaker? As for the other one, it was the leader Yemo. Needless to say, his strength was almost at the threshold of the sky stage from Eunice's tone. Only Zwafan would be able to deal with this kind of strength. If Twain were to encounter him, he would definitely die. In the face of absolute strength, many tricks were just a joke. The last one was the sky stage magician. Although his body was still stained with the magician's magic, Tang Yin really didn't meet him face to face. To be honest, Tang Yin's vigilance against him was almost comparable to Yemo's. The reason was very simple. Tang Yin didn't have many encounters with magicians, let alone the rare sky stage magician. Although he had inquired about it from Josiah, there was very little that could really help in the battle. This was undoubtedly the most unsettling because you didn't know the opponent's attack style, and it was easy to be at a disadvantage. Of course, it was useless to think about this now. After all, Tang Yin didn't know how many people came. As for the current target, he didn't have one for the time being. Tang Yin was only thinking about how to recover his body to its best state before the other party found him. As long as his injuries were good, he had the ability to deal with the opponent. After Tang Yin set off briskly, Sang Pu and Oliver rushed over. Most magical beasts didn't like to interact with humans, and the higher the level, the more so. The reason for this was very simple. Humans were too covetous of the various parts on their bodies. The three-eyed golden lion killed by Yema had the same habit. In order to find it, the Dusk Hunter Group's trio had spent a lot of effort. Because of this, they were naturally too far away from the city. Fortunately, Sang Pu was there. Especially after knowing that something had happened to Eunice, he immediately exploded and brought Oliver along with him to teleport dozens of times. Only when his magic power was exhausted and his spirit became seriously unstable did he stop this dangerous action. It was really hair-raising, and the two of them would fall directly into the space of death if there was a slight mistake. However, the effect was obvious. They rushed forward for hundreds of kilometers. Next, they stopped a small merchant, and before the mercenaries guarding the merchant could react, they directly took two horses and left. Moving forward in such a direct and violent manner, the two finally arrived outside Mountain Creek City at night. Phew! Ollie let out a breath of hot air and pulled open his collar to reveal his chest muscles. Although Ollie's strength was outstanding, such a crazy rush still made him a little tired. Isn't that person in the northwest direction? Why are we here? A few days ago, Eunice and I destroyed a secret hiding place of the Gray Coat Army in the neighboring Grand City. Phew! In the past few days, this is the place with the most activity. Something must have happened to Eunice here. Compared to Oliver, Sang Pu's appearance was even more miserable. His black robe was wet as if he had been fished out of the water. The half of his face that was exposed was also extremely pale, and he looked a little dispirited. Oliver nodded when he heard this. With Eunice's strength and skills, it was impossible for her to be killed so easily. And regardless of whether Eunice is dead or not, to be able to force her to this extent, the opponent's strength is definitely not weak. Sang Pu took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He said coldly, "I'm really curious. Who exactly is it? Then let's go in and take a look." Hearing this explanation, Oliver also put away his contempt. His original plan was to directly chase after the opponent and then kill him with a knife to take revenge. However, now that Sang Pu said this, he was also somewhat bewildered. At this time, the city gate was already closed, but this was naturally a joke in front of Spatial Magician. Sang Pu waved his hand. First, there was a ripple, and then a white light gradually appeared. But at this time, wait, Oliver suddenly frowned, and then strode out of the teleportation range, walking towards the city gate that was dozens of steps away. There was a bonfire beside the city gate, but the range of its light was limited. On one side of the wall, there were some large portraits. These were the most common and widespread wanted posters in this strange world. At the top of these wanted posters, there were two that were the most eye-catching. Eunice. Sang Pu also saw the portrait of the enchanting woman and murmured, "Who else could it be if it was not their member, Eunice? How dare you? Who are you? The city gate is closed. Quickly retreat." On top of the bluestone city wall, There were soldiers guarding the city who noticed the two people standing in a daze and immediately shouted a warning. After the city gate was closed, there was naturally no defense below. If at this time someone took the opportunity to place an explosive crystal or something, then there would be a big problem. It was also because Mountain Stream City, which was behind the city, did not have high vigilance, that Sang-Pu and the others could directly approach the city. If they were at the front line, there would have been a rain of arrows by now. The two people below naturally turned a deaf ear to it, especially Sang-Pu. After he came back to his senses amidst the roars of the guards, he raised his hand and beckoned. The two portraits at the top suddenly floated down together. Damn it, put it down. The feeling of being looked down upon was naturally not good, not to mention that the other party unscrupulously tore down the wanted posters in the dark. If this was not provocation, what was? The guards were furious and directly waved their hands. Brothers, get ready, aim. What happened? Just as the guards were about to give the order to attack, a question suddenly came from behind. Captain Lei. The guard turned his head to take a look and immediately gave a military salute. He then respectfully replied, "There are two people below who didn't listen to my advice and approached the city gate. They even tore up the wanted posters. I'm going to give the order to attack." Oh, the one called Captain Lei was a middle-aged man with white hair on his temples. His eyes were deep and sharp. After listening to the guard's report, he nodded thoughtfully and then stuck his head out of the city wall to look down. Below, Sang-Pu was folding the two portraits and putting them into his robe. Beside him, Oliver raised his eyebrows and suddenly looked up. Dang, dang, dang. Captain Lei, who was on the city wall, first trembled and then took 3 steps back. His face was a little pale, and he hurriedly waved his hands to the surrounding people. "Stop attacking. Everyone put down your bows." The guard who had shouted before was stunned. He was a little unwilling, but he still subconsciously carried out the order. All the guards here knew that their Captain Lei was not an ordinary person. He used to be in the 3 major armies. He had killed many barbarians, and his eyesight was particularly accurate. It was said that he was the one who helped the chief of the guards identify the bounty hunter who was eliminated a few days ago. However, the chief was really unlucky. He was successfully eliminated, but ended up in prison. Since Captain Lei said to stop the attack, if it was not a matter of identity, then it was naturally because they could not afford to offend him. Although the guard carried out the order, it was inevitable that he was unconvinced, so he still leaned on the city wall and looked down. Where did the white light come from, Buzz? With a soft sound, a circle of milky white brilliance suddenly rose into the sky. It was particularly dazzling in the dim night. Then it disappeared in a flash, leaving no trace. After putting down the hand that was covering his eyes, the guard looked blankly at the empty city gate below. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Gasps could be heard one after another. The city guards were all dumbfounded, their faces filled with lingering fear. They naturally knew what the situation just now meant. That was a spatial magician. Captain, should we report this to the higher-ups? The guard looked at Captain Lei with admiration and asked carefully. It was no exaggeration to say that Captain Lei had just saved his life. The strength of the two people just now was obviously not low, not to mention that there was a rare spatial magician. Such a force would not be reassuring no matter where it was placed. Besides, the atmosphere in Mountain Stream City was strange now. It was really not suitable to cause any waves. Forget it. Don't worry about it. Captain Lei shook his head and solemnly looked at the people around him. What happened just now? Just pretend you didn't see it. Don't ask why. I hope you can forget it as soon as possible. With that, Captain Lei turned and left. There was not much expression on his face, but he was complaining incessantly in his heart. In a glance just now, he saw that the other party was collecting the two murderers who destroyed the Mountain Stream Goddess statue. It was clear that there must be some connection between them. However, Captain Lei did not intend to intervene. What a joke. He still wanted to live for 2 more years. He already regretted coming out to ask, just now. Sang-Pu did not know that they had been seen through, but even if they knew, they would not care. With their strength, they really did not need to worry too much about doing things. Damn it, this is a large city? After walking out of an alley, Oliver frowned and cursed gloomily. Although the outer city gate was closed, the nightlife in the city naturally continued. However, compared to before, it was too deserted here. First of all, the square in the city was blocked all day long. It was said that it would not be open to the public until a new mountain stream goddess statue was built. Then, the flow of people decreased a lot. Even the gang members who liked nightlife the most were almost nowhere to be seen. It could not be helped. It was easy to step on a landmine if you came out to play at this time. It seems that the previous movement was really big. Well, let's find our peers. Sang-Pu looked around and walked out first. They must know the specific information about Eunice. Chapter 369. Author's note: depressed. Tonsils inflammation. I took an x-ray. It's bronchitis. Civet needs to be on N4 drip for the next 3 days. Update as much as possible. How unlucky. The night was foggy and cold. This was a rather quiet alley. There were no street lights or pedestrians. Of course, the flow of people on the main roads of Mountain Stream City had greatly decreased, let alone here. However, at this moment, a man in a black robe suddenly appeared at the entrance of the alley. Without any hesitation, he stepped directly into the alley. At this time, this iconic attire, needless to say, this person was naturally Sang-Pu, running wildly for hundreds of kilometers a day before had calmed his hate-filled mind down slightly. Therefore, after determining that Mountain Stream City was the place where Eunice had met with an accident, Sang-Pu was not in a hurry to chase after Tang Yin. Instead, he came here to investigate the situation first. Just like how Tang Yin did not know about Sang-Pu and Oliver, they did not know anything about the person who had caused Eunice's accident. However, one thing was for sure. The other party was definitely not weak. Otherwise, the Eye of Space would not have appeared on his body. Therefore, it was even more necessary to collect information first. There were many ways to obtain information. If he wanted to be faster, he would have to find someone like the local tyrant. With Sang-Pu's strength, it would not be a problem to find a gang's base and teleport in. Then, he could capture the gang leader and interrogate him. However, the authenticity of the information, the level of detail, and so on could not be guaranteed. Professional matters had to be handled by professionals. Therefore, after some effort, Sang-Pu found this place. As the saying went, where there was demand, there would be a market. Information was sometimes worthless, but sometimes it could make one rich overnight. Therefore, there was never a shortage of professionals. Some retired bandits, assassins, and even bounty hunters would choose this line of work. Sang-Pu himself was a bounty hunter. Naturally, he was clear about the knack. It was not difficult to find this place. After a while, after walking for about 100 meters, he stopped in his tracks. He knocked on the wooden door on the left. Knock, knock, knock. There was no movement inside. However, Sang-Pu was patient. He knocked on the door with moderate strength. Finally, with a creak, the wooden door opened a narrow gap. A middle-aged man who seemed to have just woken up appeared. He was frowning. "Who are you? And are you sure you're in the right place?" "I'm sure." Sang-Pu didn't have the intention to introduce himself. He reached out and grabbed a cloth bag from under his robe. He shook it twice. Ding, ding, ding. The crisp sound of metal colliding echoed in the quiet alley. It was a sound that could only be made by hundreds of gold coins. One piece of news, and all of these will be yours. A greedy look flashed across his face. The middle-aged man retracted his gaze and spread his hands in confusion. "I'm sorry, sir. Although I like these gold coins very much, unfortunately, I can't help you. If there was an industry, there would be rules. Selling intelligence was not something that could be done by just talking. It was actually very easy to make enemies in this line of work. Therefore, regardless of whether it was for the sake of the client or their own safety, concealment was the first priority. Other things aside, it was impossible to do business with strangers." Sang-Pu didn't put down the purse full of gold coins. Instead, he raised his left index finger and slowly moved it towards the stone wall beside him. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Splash, splash, splash. the middle-aged man's face instantly froze. He stared blankly at the stone wall, not far away. Suddenly, a gully about 2 inches wide appeared on the stone wall. It continued to extend, and fine sand and gravel fell. The gully moved about 2 meters before stopping. Sang-Pu flipped his palm and hooked his index finger. A stone rose out of thin air. With a flick of his finger, whoosh bang, a figure fell from the right side of the alley more than 10 meters away. Immediately, a small crossbow rolled and fell to the side. Gulp! The middle-aged man swallowed his saliva with difficulty. His face was full of shock and bitterness. The person who sold intelligence naturally attached great importance to his own safety. The person with the crossbow was actually his subordinate. He was usually responsible for surveillance and shooting arrows at critical moments. Of course, this kind of small trick was undoubtedly a joke to the bounty hunters who often walked on the edge of death. Sang-Pu didn't take any further action. He didn't even speak. He just placed the purse in front of the middle-aged man again. Money or life? Please, please come in. The middle-aged man didn't hesitate. He quickly took the purse and waved his hand at the door. The room was extremely messy. It could be said that except for a table that was still standing, everything else had basically fallen. Even the standing table was piled with all kinds of debris. Crash, please sit, please sit. The middle-aged man waved his hand to remove the debris on the table. He straightened a chair and said in a rather flattering manner. Sang-Pu looked at the pink lady's underwear hanging by the chair and curled his lips slightly. He then took out 2 portraits from his bosom. I want to know what happened in the city a few days ago. Yes, about them. Taking the portraits and opening them, the middle-aged man's eyes flashed with shock. He forced himself to suppress it and looked up at Sang-Pu again. He said calmly, "Oh, so that's what you want. Simple. I have a detailed summary of the information here. I'll get it for you." After a while, the middle-aged man indeed brought out a large stack of papers from the back of the room. The collapse of the Mountain Creek goddess statue was such a big event that these intelligence sellers naturally wouldn't miss it. And don't underestimate their professional abilities. Even the post-incident investigation by the police station might not be as detailed as the contents of this large stack of papers. After flipping through a few of the papers, Sang-Pu's hand paused, and he said involuntarily, "The first saint of the Temple of Light." He and Oliver had rushed over in a hurry. They only knew that there had been a big commotion in Mountain Creek City. Even the statue in the city square had been smashed. As for the details, they really didn't know. Now that they saw that the destroyed statue was actually the first saint of the Temple of Light, they couldn't help but be speechless. The Dusk Hunter group's position in the industry was at the top level. The strength of each member was undeniably strong. But even so, if they were to go against the Temple of Light, it would really be a joke. After hearing Sang-Pu's tone, the middle-aged man's eyebrows twitched slightly, as if he had understood something. After flipping through these few pages, Sang-Pu's hand paused again. He looked up. The police station encircled and annihilated the bounty hunters? Yes, in a deserted corner in the south of the city. A total of 15 bounty hunters were killed. But at the beginning, a woman should have rushed out and injured many people. Finally, she was killed in the commercial street near the city square. This was professional. In the police station's investigation report, this woman didn't appear at all. They only treated her as a victim of the disaster. There was a low response. Under the invisible hood, Sang-Pu's eyebrows were already furrowed. In the beginning, it was Sang-Pu who accompanied Eunice to kill the Gray Coat Army's secret organization. Of course, he knew about the existence of this group of bounty hunters. When Sang-Pu came, he even wanted to find them and ask them about it. Unexpectedly, they were all dead. What happened after that? Sang-Pu lost a little bit of patience and asked directly, "Tell me about the battle in the city below." Okay. The middle-aged man paused, as if he was sorting out the information in his mind. Then he said, "The content of the battle in the city was basically obtained from the onlookers. First of all, there were a total of 2 people, the 2 people in the portrait you gave me. Wait a minute." Sang-Pu suddenly waved his hand to stop him. His tone was strange. "You mean the battle was between 2 people, one-on-one?" Yes. Stunned for a moment, Sang-Pu slowly let out a breath of turbid air. Continue. On the way here, Sang-Pu and Oliver naturally had some guesses. To be honest, they did not think that the person fighting with Eunice was a single person. The reason was very simple. Eunice's speed was too fast. If it was a single warrior, they would not be able to defend, let alone attack. As for the other party being a void-level master, it was impossible. Because if it was really someone with such strength fighting with Eunice, the commotion would not be so big. Next, the two people should have fought to a draw. They destroyed almost the entire commercial street. A draw? Okay, a draw. Sang-Pu pursed his lips and suppressed the shock in his heart again. After that, there was news from the police station. One of them was a black fog, and the other was a red whirlwind. They worked together to destroy the statue. When the two of them reappeared, there was a dagger in their left chest, but they were not dead. Then, they joked for a while and left together. The netherworld dark fog, it was really Eunice. At this time, Sang-Pu was no longer lucky. At the same time, his heart sank. He was too familiar with Eunice's character. In the battle situation at that time, it was impossible for her to choose to stop, unless, what else? The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment and said, Later they seem to have walked into a clothing store. I can't be sure if this news is true or false. The battle was so fierce, and in the end they met to go to a store. This inexplicable reversal, no matter who heard it, would think it was nonsense. So when a middle-aged man said this, he also emphasized that the source of the news was unreliable. Damn it. Under the robe, Sang-Pu was pale. His hands were clenched together, and his joints were blue. If this happened to others, it would be nonsense, but to Eunice it was normal. Cough, cough. The news after that was that the man stole a carriage and left, disappearing without a trace. The woman never appeared again. Well, that's the specific situation. After the middle-aged man finished talking about the situation at that time, the room fell into a short silence. Sang-Pu stood there quietly, without any words or movements, as if he was in a daze. But the slightly trembling black robe showed that he was not as calm as he looked on the surface. Eunice should be dead. To be honest, although no one had said it before, Sang-Pu and Oliver had both thought of this result. Actually, this was also the most likely possibility. With Eunice's temperament, she would not have used the Eye of Space so easily unless she was in a dead end. But when there was no definite news, anyone would have fantasies. But now, this fantasy was undoubtedly shattered. The middle-aged man's eyes flashed, but he did not rush Sang-Pu and only stood to the side. After a long time, Sang-Pu took a deep breath and asked indifferently, Where is the specific location of the store? The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment, then reacted and told him the specific location of the clothing store. Thank you. Well, you used to be a bounty hunter, right? After thanking him, Sang-Pu asked casually. The middle-aged man was startled and forced a smile. I fooled around for a period of time, but that was many years ago. What I mean is, you should know me, right? His tone was still indifferent, and the shadowy face under the hood seemed to hide a bottomless abyss. Let me guess, you probably recognized me when I took out the portrait. The atmosphere in the room gradually became strange. How? How could that be? It's the first time we've met. The middle-aged man's eyes flashed, and he waved his hand to deny it, slowly extending his hand from under the robe. Sang-Pu's lips curled up. Then let me change the question. How many gold coins can you get for selling the news that I'm here? A trace of panic flashed across the middle-aged man's face, but he still forced himself to be calm and said, I don't understand what you're talking about. Is there some misunderstanding between us? Before he finished speaking, suddenly, boom, the hidden door was blasted open, and a figure flew in from the outside. Bang, it landed on the chair that had been straightened, and it was smashed into pieces. Haha, are you done talking? What a coincidence. I've just finished dealing with this. Laughing, the tall and sturdy Oliver strode in. The middle-aged man looked at the silent subordinate on the ground, and his face finally changed. Pale, he took a few steps back and in his panic knocked over a few things and fell to the ground in a sorry state. Seeing this, Sang Poo's lips curled up as if he was laughing. His hand formed into a claw, and he seemed to grab something out of thin air. Roar! It was also at this moment that the middle-aged man who was in an extremely sorry state earlier suddenly leaped up and directly crashed into the corner of the wall. Pooh, that seemingly heavy-bearing wall, was actually penetrated like paper, and a deep underground passage appeared behind him. But unfortunately, his figure was already fixed in midair at this moment. No matter how his hands and feet struggled, or how his face contorted, he was unable to step into the escape passage that was close at hand. With a wave of his hand, bang, the middle-aged man was thrown back into the center of the room. Interesting, as expected of a bounty hunter. Oliver looked at the tunnel that led straight down and sighed with emotion. When they found this place, the two already knew the middle-aged man's identity. Just in case, Sang Poo let Oliver stay outside, but he did not expect to capture the person on the ground who was going to deliver the news. You know our identity, so you should know our methods. I'll ask you a few questions you won't refuse, right? Sang Poo reached out to help the middle-aged man up and pressed him on the table beside him, asking softly. I admit defeat. The middle-aged man's face was ashen, and he said without hesitation, ask away, just give me a quick death. Deal. Who do you want to deliver the news to? A few procedures, but in the end, it will be delivered to the Temple of Light. The middle-aged man wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and did not hesitate. Eunice's identity has been identified, and your Dusk Hunter group cannot escape responsibility. The price in the underworld is 100,000 each. Good. So Eunice's body is not here? Sang Poo asked again. Body? Oliver's expression changed drastically, and he cried out involuntarily. Then, his expression turned gloomy, and he lowered his head. His previous guess had come true. She's not here. Ever since I entered the shop, I haven't seen her again. Who is the person who fought with Eunice? I don't know. The middle-aged man shook his head, and then emphasized, I really don't know. I've never heard of such a person. Thank you. Bang. As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man's head seemed to have been cut by a sharp knife, and blood spurted out. The frozen expression from before directly rolled down. Oliver's expression was complicated. Eunice is really dead? No wonder he did not believe it. Since the establishment of the Dusk Hunter group, the 5 of them had been through so many years of bloodshed. But recently, the members had died one after another. Let's go, we'll talk on the way. Let's go to the shop in the city first. Chapter 370. The storm was coming, and the clouds were moving in all directions. Due to the limitations of transportation, the flow of news in the other world was indeed a little slow. However, 2 days later, the news of the Greycoat Army building a city finally spread from the surrounding cities to the periphery of the 100,000 Mountains. Without a doubt, other than the frontline areas where the fierce battle was raging, most of the people in the north gathered their attention. Everyone knew that no matter how big the city of the Greycoat Army was, since it had been built, there was no reason for them to give it up so easily. Therefore, this was destined to be a battle that was different from the previous hide-and-seek battles. In a head-on battle, the winner took all. As such, the people in the north had mixed feelings. Some were secretly worried about the fate of the Greycoat Army, thinking that they were being too hasty. There were also those who were happy and mocking, thinking that the Greycoat Army would definitely collapse when the Bran Army arrived. Even those who were indifferent would not refuse to use this as an after-dinner topic. The North was completely lively. The official newspapers of each city would not let go of this opportunity. Almost every day, the latest developments would be on the first page of the newspaper. The army has officially stepped into the 100,000 Mountains. The Greycoat bandits are panicking. Small contact battles have been carried out. News of victory is spreading. The situation was great. It gave people the impression that Bran's army was advancing triumphantly and that they would be able to destroy the so-called Greycoat Army in a matter of days. They were elated. The people who compiled the newspapers were completely overjoyed. It had to be said that the experience of being slapped in the face some time ago was a painful memory. Now that they had the opportunity, wouldn't it be like adding insult to injury? In addition, the Gray Coat Army's recent publicity in various cities had suddenly disappeared, which gave them the illusion that the other party had become timid and cowardly. Suddenly, the collective climax. Of course, these things did not have much to do with the current Tang. It was not that he did not care about the Gray Coat Army, but that he could not protect himself and did not have the leisure to do so. Since setting off from Grand City the day before yesterday, Tang's state was that he was on the road. And on the road, the good thing about a carriage was that it wasn't bumpy, and there was an old horse in front. Occasionally, when the owner hid in the carriage to take a nap, the horse would also slowly move along the side of the road, ensuring that it wouldn't lead the owner into a ditch. However, if that was the case, the speed would naturally not be too fast. Tang was now more focused on recuperating from his injuries, so he didn't care about it. Of course, this was also because he had already found a specific place to escape. The land area of the north was much larger than that of the south, but there were fewer cities in the north. Therefore, the distance between the neighboring cities was naturally further. Some were a day's drive away, while others were a week's drive away. Such a distance was naturally disadvantageous for Tang to escape. He had already grasped the rules of the spatial eye, and it was about once every half a day. The time difference was the best opportunity for him to escape. As long as he could calculate the time well and enter a densely populated city, it would not be easy for the other party to find him within a few kilometers. Of course, if he couldn't enter the city in time because of the distance and was caught in the wilderness, then it would be a tragedy. Don't forget that a great magician could fly and look down from above, but the range of his surveillance was naturally very wide. It would be difficult to escape at that time. Tang was now going to Fire Beacon City, which was not far from here. The name sounded very much like a battlefield. However, Tang didn't intend to fight to the death with the other party here. He came here because there were 4 neighboring cities around this city, and the distance between them was almost half a day's journey. It was like a satellite city of a major city on the front lines. It was just noon when Tang crawled out of the carriage, yawning and stretching his body. Then, the joints all over his body made a series of crackling sounds, and he grimaced with a pained expression. Damn, when will this F***-ked-up life in a different world come to an end? If one were to summarize Tang's life in a different world, it was simply a history of blood and tears. Generally speaking, it was being chased by all kinds of people. To be able to live until now was already a miracle of life. Sighing with emotion, Tang jumped out of the carriage. First, he took out some fodder to reward the old horse. Then, he jumped on the carriage and picked up the whip. With a crisp sound, he sped up. I have a little donkey, but I never ride it. One day, on a whim, I rode it to the market. I was holding a small whip in my hand, and I was really proud of it. Soon, the city wall of Fire Beacon City appeared in his line of sight. Tang observed a few times and couldn't help but be stunned. It really deserved its name. This name, full of battle aura, was indeed not given in vain. The height of an ordinary city wall was 30 to 40 feet. 1 pole equals 3 meters. After all, it was not the front lines, so it was very difficult to experience the flames of war. But with a simple visual inspection, the city wall of Fire Beacon City was at least 80 feet. And ordinary city walls were usually mainly made of cyan rocks, supplemented by bricks of other colors, which made them look beautiful and lively. But Fire Beacon City was entirely made of black rocks, which looked very sturdy and 120% ugly. As he gradually approached the watchtowers on the city wall, the shooting ports for large city-guarding crossbows and so on were all available. But unfortunately, there were no actual weapons placed there. From afar, it looked more like a beehive. This kind of city style seemed to be completely for war, but the key point was that this was the peaceful hinterland of the north. And even if the northern wilderness tribes attacked, What use would this single defensive city have? After all, there were so many roads, and with legs, one could directly bypass them. So in summary, this city always looked indescribably funny. After complaining for a while, Tang In drove the carriage into the city from the south gate. Without stopping, he followed the main road all the way north. In the end, he spent about half an hour crossing the entire city and stopped at the north gate. He got off the carriage, replenished some food and fodder, and then found a nearby tavern to sit down and drink. There was nothing special about the tavern, but there was a bard playing the five-string bow and singing. His skills were simple, and his voice was good. As for the content of the song, well, it was the scene of a noble girl having an affair. This was also inevitable. Wherever you went, you would recite the sutras. The people here were all commoners. If they sang a rhythmic opera here, not only would they not be rewarded, they might even be beaten out for disturbing the mood of drinking. Tang In came in at the right time. After the noble girl missed her strong lover under the moon, she could not bear the pain in her heart and resolutely jumped over the wall to leave. Oh, it was a world of love. But are you sure it's just the love in your heart? There's no physical love. Tang In sipped the wine and guessed naughtily. Of course, the bard would not let go of this kind of scene that the public liked to see and stimulate the senses. It didn't matter if it was vulgar or vulgar. It was human nature at the beginning. Soon, the girl and her lover were rolling firewood in the mill. The tavern was silent, and the reactions of the audience were also very respectful. They either held their wine glasses and did not drink for a long time, or stared at the bard with longing and yearning in their eyes, as if they were the lover in question. At this moment, F***. Tang In's body trembled, and he felt his slightly hot left shoulder. He cursed softly. Needless to say, it was naturally that damn eye of space that reacted again. Putting down the wine glass, Tang In sighed softly, and his expression was particularly bitter. Sigh, how should I put it? How can you do such a thing to disturb people's enjoyment of a great literary creation? What a killjoy, killjoy. Shaking his head, Tang In stood up. It did not matter if the other party was 100 miles away. Since there was a reaction, he had to leave his current position. He walked over, and under the astonished and disdainful gazes of the crowd, he dropped a silver coin into the bard's hat in front of him. Then, as if he had a toothache, he grimaced and quickly walked toward the tavern's entrance. Tang In naturally understood the crowd's thoughts. This was the climax of the song. If he left at this time, he would either be pretending to be serious or incompetent in a certain aspect. F***. Angry, I have to be angry. Isn't this just giving me a reason to kill you? Tang In walked out of the tavern with a dark face, directly boarded the carriage, and drove out of the northern city gate, heading toward the next city. This was a chase that did not involve any confrontation. After the location of Fire Beacon City was exposed, he could only continue to the next city, Air City. Traveling was always boring, and it was even more so when one person traveled alone. So, let's press the fast-forward button with infinite resentment. In the evening, Tang In leisurely drove the carriage to Air City, rushing to enter the city before the city gate closed. Air City was much smaller than Fire Beacon City. It was only a small city. When Tang In arrived, he put away his leisurely expression. After asking a few passers-by, he directly drove the carriage to the southern city. There was also a secret organization here. When they parted, Josiah gave Tang In the addresses of all the organizations in the city. Although there was no publicity now, the personnel of the organization had not been withdrawn. The hiding place was, needless to say, it was still the same remote house. When Tang In arrived, the person in charge of the organization had been waiting at the door for a long time. After a simple greeting, Tang In directly asked, "Is there any news?" "Yes, Captain Tang." A voice suddenly came from the house, and then a young man jogged through the door. "It's you." Tang In raised his eyebrows and took the initiative to greet the young man. This young man was one of the people who followed Josiah to welcome Tang In when he first arrived at Mountain Stream City. He could be considered as one of the higher-ups of the secret organization. After a simple greeting, the young man took out a sealed cloth bag from his arms and handed it over. Thank you, you've worked hard. After receiving the cloth bag, Tang In smiled and gave a simple salute. When he left, the young man was still with Josiah. Now that he was here, he was undoubtedly a messenger who rushed over. And looking at his travel-worn appearance, he should have just arrived. Captain Tang is too polite. Waving his hand, the young man hurriedly returned the salute. There was an inexplicable look of admiration on his face. Although because of his relationship with Josiah, he did not like Tang In very much. But after all, that was a small matter. Now that he was facing a disaster, he naturally did not care about it. After saying that, the young man and the person in charge of the organization invited Tang In into the house, and then walked out to avoid arousing suspicion. Tang In saw this and did not urge them to stay. He tore open the sealed cloth bag, poured out a few pieces of folded paper, and flipped it open to read under the oil lamp. Elegant and neat, but with a kind of sharpness that penetrated the paper. It was indeed Josiah's handwriting without a doubt. The content was very concise. Except for the last sentence of concern, the general idea was that two strange people entered the clothing store last night. They should be the members of the Dusk Hunter group who were chasing after them. Their appearance was drawn down on two other pieces of paper. That's right, this was a reason why Tang In asked Josiah for help before. In fact, the profession of a bounty hunter was very similar to an assassin. It was purer than the ordinary assassin in the other world. Tang In could vaguely understand their style of doing things, plus the deep relationship between the members of the Dusk Hunter group. He expected that the other party would go to Mountain Creek City and enter the clothing store. So, he asked Josiah to send someone to wait there first, and the result was that they waited. Of course, there was also the contribution of Oliver and the others. When the base was in chaos, Josiah was far away from the battle, so he did not see Oliver's appearance. However, the one in Mountain Creek City was a high-end clothing store, and it wasn't as if they didn't sell men's clothing. But you were a burly man wearing all kinds of animal skins and carrying a big knife, and a mysterious black-robed man in a hooded robe. No matter how you looked at it, it seemed more likely that you were here to cause trouble than to buy clothes. Of course, things were easier said than done. It seemed a little unbelievable that such a guess could be successful, and this was also the reason why the young man's face was full of admiration. However, Tang In did not have self-awareness in this regard. This guess was based on imagination, and whether it succeeded or not depended mostly on luck. And even if the other party did not come, the secret agencies were spread out in most cities in the north, and they were all chasing after him. It was only a matter of time before they found him. After reading it, Tang In directly touched the paper to the flame. When it ignited, he threw it on the ground and watched it burn to ashes. With a wave of his hand, it disappeared into thin air. Then, Tang In picked up the other two pieces of paper and spread them side by side on the table. One was a burly man with a reckless face and extremely short hair. The other was a strange man with a black robe over his head, revealing only the parts below his nose. This portrait was very lifelike, and Tang In recognized Oliver at a glance. As for the other, it was naturally the space magician that he had never met. Phew! Taking a deep breath, Tang In frowned and nodded at the portrait. His face was not ugly, but it was definitely not good. There were 3 people left in the Twilight Hunter group, and now 2 had come. This was not the worst outcome, but it also broke Tang In's beautiful fantasy. If only one person came, even if it was the mysterious space magician. After Tang In dealt with them and recovered from his injuries, he would take the initiative to attack. But now there were 2 people, and Tang In was clear about Oliver's strength. He was an advanced Earth rank, and like Eunice, he was also an opponent that he would have to risk his life to take down. I still have to call for reinforcements. Tang In picked up the 2 portraits and narrowed his long and narrow eyes. I only hope that you can do your best and not let me down. Chapter 371. Cities in other worlds had to close their gates every night. This had little to do with whether or not they would be attacked. The main reason was the issue of taxes. Head tax, tax on merchant convoys, and so on were major sources of income for the city. In the evening, just as the gates of Fire Beacon City were about to close, Sang Poo and Oliver arrived. Needless to say, to be able to travel such a long distance in half a day, it was naturally due to spatial teleportation and stealing horses. The gates of Fire Beacon City were, of course, no obstacle to them. But now that the gates were open, no one would be so extravagant as to use spatial magic to enter. So after throwing out a dozen copper coins, the two followed the last batch of people into the city. This city, the builder must be crazy. Oliver looked back at the tall and wide walls and shook his head. This comment was very accurate. If Tangan was here, he would definitely raise both hands in agreement. Sangpu was not in the mood to chat, but he still answered briefly. I've seen it in an ancient book before. This city seems to have been attacked by the northern wilderness tribes. The barbarians could actually fight their way here. Oliver looked surprised when he heard this, then looked at Sangpu frowning and observing the surroundings, so he tactfully did not ask any more questions. As for Eunice's death, the two had already confirmed. The shop had not had time to deal with the slightly corroded floor. When Sangpu and Oliver found it, they naturally knew that it was the work of the dark nether mist. Bounty hunters were a profession that walked under the scythe of the Grim Reaper, so death was a common occurrence for them. Oliver, after a day's rest, was almost recovered. In such a state, it was not that he did not value Eunice as a teammate, but that his nerves had long been numbed by the grief. Or rather, it was because he had seen so much that he was used to it. Now, he had no other thoughts besides killing the other party for revenge. As for Sangpu, on the surface, he looked even calmer than Oliver. Other than the sadness and hatred when he first found out, he basically did not show any other expression. Perhaps only someone as familiar as Oliver could faintly sense the monstrous, killing intent beneath the calmness. You should be able to sense it now, right? Oliver licked his lips and turned to ask. I could have done an hour ago, but there's no need to rush. Sangpu frowned and looked into the distance. The city is too big. It won't be too late to wait until the city center to sense him, lest he takes the opportunity to sneak out of the city. Oliver nodded in realization. The location that he sensed was not accurate. It was only an approximate area. If he used it in the center of the city, Sangpu could use short-distance teleportation to block the city gate if the other party was in the city. After all, it was already late at night. If the other party escaped out of the city and hid in some mountain range or ravine, it would be impossible to find them. Of course, there was a reason for this. Eunice had died in a one-on-one duel, so they couldn't help but be wary of the other party's speed. It may be said that, with the exception of Samson, the chances of Oliver overtaking him were infinitely close to nil. If they couldn't stop him immediately, they could only watch him escape. Moments later, the two of them arrived at the city center. There was no doubt that this was also a square. There was also a statue of a majestic general. Thinking back to what Sangpu had said earlier, this should be the general who had fought against the barbarians in the northern wilderness. Without hesitation, Sangpu found an empty space and immediately formed a seal with both hands. Waves of finger shadows appeared, and then a flickering white light appeared out of thin air, flowing around his palm like water. Oliver stood to the side, not making any preparations, but all the muscles under his animal skin were tense. He was waiting for Sangpu to point out the direction and then instantly rush out. Whether or not he could catch up, he had to try. Besides, the other party was not weak. Even if he was entangled by Sangpu, he would still need his help to finish him off quickly. After a while, Sangpu put down his palm. He first let out a long breath of turbid air, then looked to the north and shook off the sweat on the tip of his nose. How is it? Oliver asked anxiously. Shaking his head, Sangpu said indifferently, 100 kilometers to the north. F*CKU. Oliver slammed his palm, his expression ugly. Do you think he knows the use of the spatial eye? Magic was mysterious in the eyes of outsiders, especially spatial magic. Therefore, some unpopular spells like the spatial eye were not necessarily known to the public. Sangpu did not answer this question. Instead, he frowned and said, "Do you know the surrounding terrain of this city?" "That's easy." Oliver looked left and right, then strode out. In a moment, he came back with two people who looked like merchants. It was not a rough fight. Although Oliver was big enough, he was not someone who only knew how to use his fists. At times like this, it was obvious that gold coins would be more effective. Merchants traveled here and there, so they were naturally familiar with the terrain. Sang-Poo's questioning ended quickly. It did not even take a minute. As for the price, it was 2 gold coins for neighboring cities, all more than 100 kilometers. "Haha, interesting." Laughing without any emotion, Sang-Poo turned to Oliver and said, "It seems that he not only knows the use of the spatial eye, but is also very familiar with it." After a pause, he continued, "And if I'm not wrong, he should be familiar with us. A great mage, the interval between the spatial eye's detection is indeed half a day. Is he preparing to play hide and seek with us?" "Haha, how interesting. Familiar with us?" Oliver frowned. "When did we provoke such a person? When we were Mountain Stream City, we should have rushed into the prison and interrogated the head of the guards." "Forget it. That's not important." Shaking his head slightly, Sang-Poo continued, "The other party's strength is about the same as ours. As long as we meet him face to face, killing him won't be difficult." Oliver nodded when he heard this, and then his heart skipped a beat. "Yes, that's right. It's more than 100 kilometers. Isn't it still possible for us to teleport there now?" Don't forget that when Sang-Poo first sensed that something had happened to Eunice, he had taken Oliver and teleported several hundred kilometers away. Not necessarily, and there's not much point in doing so. Sang-Poo rejected this suggestion. It would take about 10 minutes to teleport there. In that time, the other party would have already left the city. At that time, do you know which direction he would have left in? It was true that short-distance teleportation was called teleportation, but there was still time to prepare. The other party's speed was not low, and he was familiar with the effects of the spatial eye. There was no problem in taking the opportunity to leave. F***CK. Then what should we do? Oliver was suddenly anxious and spread out his hands. Are we just going to follow behind him like this and never catch up? Of course not. Sang-Poo shook his head, and his lips curled up slightly. Since he wants to play, we'll accompany him for a few trips first. When the time comes, we'll naturally meet him. All right, you make the decision. Oliver was not a person who liked to use his brain. When he heard that Sang-Poo had an idea, he immediately let go of his own brain. Then what should we do now? Find a place to rest. Sang-Poo simply threw out these words and turned to walk away. Presumably that person has already set off from the city and is rushing through the night. These few days, we've been running. Next, it's his turn. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. Was Tang in on the run now? Not at the moment, but as Sang-Poo expected, he would have to leave Coal City later. This time, he could not take a carriage and had to change to a horse to hurry. Feeling the slight heat on his left shoulder, Tang In frowned slightly, and then stood under the sign at the intersection, trying to identify the name of the street. Yes, it's here. Muttering, Tang In turned into the street on the right and kept walking inside. At this time, his image had changed back to the indifferent middle-aged man when he fought with Eunice. The street was not long, and Tang In soon reached the end. What appeared in front of him was a group of buildings surrounded by iron fences. From time to time, there were several groups of guards patrolling in a crisscross pattern. At the front, there was a very eye-catching sign. Coal City News Department. This department existed in every city. Perhaps the name was not known, but the results of the work done here were familiar to the citizens of the city. That was the compilation and publication of newspapers. It could be said that among the various administrative departments of the city, this was one of the very few departments that could make money on their own. Moreover, it was an official department, so there were naturally guards here. However, Tang In really did not pay attention to the several groups of patrolling soldiers. After a moment, after figuring out the pattern, Tang In directly jumped over the iron fence. Then, before the second patrol team arrived, he quickly bent down behind a large ornamental bonsai. Easily, Tang In sneaked into the interior of the news department. There are not many buildings here. In addition to the majestic three-story white building in front, there were several small attics and bungalows scattered behind. There were noises coming from the buildings behind, as if there was some kind of machine operating inside. However, Tang En did not come here to admire the printing technology of a different world or the process of newspaper production, etc. Looking at the three-story white building, Tang En directly went around the side, and then along the eaves, windows, balconies. Like a gecko, he quickly jumped to the third floor. Leaders, no matter which space-time or which world they were from, like to live in high places. Because when they looked down from the window, they would have a sense of superiority spontaneously. The people of the world were all ants. Tang En's luck was not bad. Soon, outside the balcony of an office, he found a big shot who was hard at work plowing. It was really plowing. His face was red, and he was sweating profusely. The land under him also gave him face. It kept calling out in a coquettish manner, and it seemed to be panting heavily. Oh, this is the evil temptation of the office, Pa. After opening the sealed window, Tang En slowly entered from the balcony. Sorry to disturb you at this time. In order to make up for my mistake, I will put this advertisement in your newspaper. After saying that, 2 pieces of white paper with a sketch gently floated on the wide office desk. And it was now on the jade back of the land. F*CK. What a vile posture. Chapter 372. Sometimes the heavens are fair, yes, but sometimes, for example, Tang En did not hear the wonderful description in the tavern, but he saw the real live broadcast in the hall at night. Another example was when Sang Pu and Oliver ran for hundreds of kilometers day and night. But Tang En continued to nap and leisurely drove the carriage slowly. Now, Sang Pu and Oliver were lying on the comfortable bed in the hotel in Fire Beacon City, while Tang En had to drive the horse, enduring the pain all over his body, and gallop in the endless night. This was not the end. In the early hours of the night, when Tang En reached the nearest city, Sang Pu woke up on time and sensed again. Damn it! The next morning, as the sun rose from the east, Sang Pu and Oliver led the horses out of the hotel in good spirits. After sensing, Sang Pu raised his eyebrows and smiled. Haha, it's getting more and more interesting. Let's continue to the north. The north? Oliver turned his head in surprise. Wasn't it the north yesterday? Did that person also rest in the same place last night? He's got guts. Yesterday evening, when they had just arrived at Fire Beacon City, they had sensed that the other party was in the North City. Logically speaking, the other party should have changed to one of the 2 nearby cities. Haha, it's not like that. Sang Pu shook his head with a smile and mounted the horse. I sensed again last night. At that time, he was in the West City. Now he just turned back. He's a little clever. In fact, the situation was as such. Fire Beacon City was the center, and the surrounding 4 small cities were almost in a square with interconnected roads. Every time Tang En went to a city, he had 3 directions to choose from. He could go straight to Fire Beacon City in the center, or go to the 2 nearby cities. The probability of 1 in 3 was not too small, but it was definitely not high either. Under such circumstances, in order to prevent Tang En from guessing the pattern, it was reasonable for Tang En to make a comeback. After all, if the other party was really following behind, with Sang Pu, a space magician, it was possible to set off from Gewer City and directly pass through Fire Beacon City to reach the city in front of him. In that case, Oliver slapped his head and grinned. Wouldn't it be better if we just wait for him to walk right into our trap in Fire Beacon City? This was a very feasible plan. As long as Sang Pu sensed it, Tang En would have to respond. After a few more times, Tang En would definitely come to Fire Beacon City. This won't do. I still have to make some preparations. Shaking his head, Sang Pu said indifferently, We are too unfamiliar with him, and his strength is enough to fight any one of us. If I don't collect more information, I won't feel at ease. Oliver nodded understandingly and did not object. Unfamiliarity meant an unknown danger. just like how they had only found out yesterday that the other party was familiar with the effects of the spatial eye. If the other party had used this opportunity to set up a trap in Fire Beacon City, they would have rushed over and stepped into it. Let's go. Our destination is Gewer City. Sang Poo and Oliver did not choose to teleport quickly. Instead, they rode on ordinary horses. The reason for this was very simple. Firstly, as long as it was a spell, it would consume mana. The only difference was how much mana was consumed. Short-distance teleportation was no exception. Although Sang Poo was a great magician, he did not feel much pressure using this mid-level spell. But after all, he could not handle the numbers. Moreover, he was facing an opponent who could kill Eunice, so he had to be careful. As for the other reason, it was that there was no need. The timing of a detection was about once every half a day to 6 hours. Even if they rushed over quickly, they would not be able to find the other party's position. And like last night's surprise attack, if they had gone in the opposite direction, they might have missed each other after a short teleportation. Close to noon, Sang Poo and Oliver followed Tangen's tracks and arrived outside Gewer City. Do we still need to go in? Oliver pulled on the reins and turned to ask. According to common sense, since they had used a surprise attack, the next step should be to obediently run away. After all, if one used too many tricks, it was easy to get caught in one's own trap. Of course, it's just a matter of luck, since we're already here. Sang Poo's expression was calm as he continued to drive the horse forward. There are too many idiots in this world who think they are smart. Maybe we will have a chance to fight. Although they did not say it clearly, both of them knew that with the other party's speed, the possibility of directly killing him in one go was not high. But as long as they fought twice, they would have a better estimation of the success rate of the encirclement. Hey, you guys, 10 country bumpkins. When Sang Poo and the young man entered through the city gate, the guard who was collecting the entrance fee raised his head, and his body suddenly trembled. Then, the blood on his face rapidly receded at a speed visible to the naked eye. His lips trembled, and his words were extremely unclear. Huh? Sang Poo was stunned. He subconsciously looked at the black robe on his body. This style is a very country bumpkin. Oh, your mother. Oliver's eyes suddenly widened. He stepped forward and grabbed the guard's collar. Do you want to die? For so many years, there were not many who dared to say this in front of them. Oh, no. The guard seemed to be frightened. He did not dare to struggle and just hurriedly waved his hand. Sorry. A guard hurried over and bowed repeatedly. This kid just came from the countryside, and his accent has not completely changed. Actually, he said 10 copper coins. 10 copper coins. It was noon. Although Gewer City was a small city, there was still a lot of people here. When the crowd heard this, they could not help but be stunned. Other than being shocked by this strange explanation, they were also shocked by the attitude of these guards. The principle that the King of Hell was easy to meet, but the little ghosts were difficult to deal with was popular everywhere. Although these guards were of low status and were not respected by any of the nobles or officials in the city, when they faced the ordinary people, their prestige was not just for show. If they were slightly displeasing to the eye, making things difficult for them was a light punishment. It was normal to find a reason to beat them up. But now this guard was humiliated to the point of being grabbed by the collar. Not only did he not dare to threaten to fight back, he did not even think to call for help from the spearman beside him. This was really abnormal. The guard's attitude was also strange. Not only did he not help to reprimand him, he chose to bow and apologize first. Could it be that the service in this city had reached such a high level? Forget it. Sang Poo patted Oliver's shoulder and shook his head to indicate that it was fine. Whether it was intentional or not, no one would be happy to be called a country bumpkin. However, no matter how strong an expert was, they would not go to the point of killing people so easily. Well, except for lunatics. Thank you. Please. The guard's face was filled with surprise when he heard this. He waved his hands and bowed repeatedly. His attitude was not even as polite as this when sending off the city lord. Naturally, he did not mention anything about the entrance fee. As for the guard who was grabbed by the collar, his face was pale and he was trembling. From the looks of it, he would not be able to recover in a short period of time. Seeing this, Sang-Pu frowned but did not ask anything. He walked straight into the city with Oliver. Their destination was naturally the center of the city. This city was relatively small. If they could sense each other, the probability of being blocked would undoubtedly increase. However, after a while, Oliver frowned as he looked around. His body twisted uncomfortably. Sang-Pu, something doesn't seem right. His footsteps paused. Sang-Pu also stopped and looked around. Even the thick-skinned Oliver could see that something was wrong. Naturally, he had noticed this long ago. However, he was really confused now. He did not understand what was going on. In fact, as long as one had eyes, they would notice that the atmosphere was strange. Now that the two of them were on the main road, the flow of people was quite dense. However, there was not a single person within a few meters of them. The passers-by who had avoided them were also dispersing. Those sneaky glances were very complicated. It was as if they were looking at a poisonous snake or a ferocious beast, or as if they were looking at an enemy who had killed their father. No matter how disdainful and vicious their glances were, they could not hurt people. However, it would definitely make people feel uncomfortable. Sang-Pu stroked his black robe and curled his lips. Find someone to ask. Before he finished speaking, a person was rushing towards them. It was a plump, middle-aged woman. From the clothes she wore and the basket in her arms, one could tell that she was an ordinary citizen. It could be said that she had nothing to do with Sang-Pu and the others. However, now her face was flushed red, and her eyes radiated undisguised anger. After a few strides, the woman suddenly took out something from the basket and waved it at Hao Ren's head. Go to hell, sneaky blasphemer. You're only fit to wander in the lowest level of the abyss while crying. Bang. Sang-Pu waved his hand and grabbed the woman's wrist. A vegetable leaf fell on top of Blackrobe's head. Oh, it was a piece of lettuce. He frowned. You know me? I know your mother. After saying this extremely valiant sentence, the basket covered Blackrobe's head. Carrots, bread, everything was smashed down. Regardless of the damage, although the attack was sudden, it naturally could not get close to Sang-Pu. With a wave of his left hand, shredded vegetable leaves and sliced bread rolled back. Suddenly, bang, the bottle broke. A large amount of red juice poured over Blackrobe's head. A pungent smell quickly spread. It happened so suddenly that Sang-Pu was not prepared. No matter the reason, the red juice accurately hit Blackrobe like raindrops. In an instant, the originally mysterious Sang-Pu turned into a spotted dog. Silence, silence. Huff, cough, cough. After a while, Sang-Pu took a deep breath, as if he was brewing something. However, he could not help but cough lightly. His body trembled. He stretched out his finger and caught a drop of juice that was about to drip from the side of his robe. Looking at it, his voice was somewhat inexplicable. Chili sauce. Whoosh, 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 kill them. God of light above, send down the holy light to purify these two evil heathens. Demon, go back to hell. Condemnation, curses, and a sky full of vegetables, fruits, boots, and baskets came whistling over. The main road was suddenly a mess. Chapter 373. It turned out that the things that fell from the sky were not just pies, but also trash. Strictly speaking, most of the things flying in the sky were fresh fruits and vegetables, as well as boots that had just been pulled off from their feet. They were not considered trash. However, since they had been abandoned by their owners, they could only be classified as trash. Pies made people happy, but trash naturally made people angry. Sang-Pu and Oliver were now very angry, and their anger could even collapse the entire city. Putting aside the great reputation of the Dusk Hunter group, Sang-Pu, a space magician, had the dignity and power to maintain his noble image in most places in Bran. Oliver, a high-rank Earth-level warrior, although his status was slightly lower than Sang-Pu's, if he expressed his desire to join any family, he was guaranteed to be treated as a distinguished guest, and resources and power could be obtained at will. But now, these two people of such status were walking on the streets. They did not offend anyone, nor did they offend anyone. Yet they were being bombarded with insults and trash. Was there any law in this world? Was there any law? Reason? F***CK the reason. If he could endure this, he was not a warrior. Roar! Oliver exploded and roared. He waved his hand and swept away the vegetables in front of him, and immediately reached for the huge sword on his back. Do you want to die? Then I'll fulfill your wish. Before Oliver could start his killing spree, Sang Poo, who had been drenched in chili sauce, was silent for a few seconds. He raised his hand and flung the fat woman in front of him away, then raised his head and roared. In an instant, an invisible wave shook out from his raised hand, and the space in this area was like ripples in a calm lake, quickly spreading out. Explode, explode, explode. Turnips, pumpkins, boots, and other flying things paused in the air and exploded at the same time. Red, yellow, green, juices, fragments, for the originally clean and tidy main road was completely overturned, like a child's mischievous graffiti, a mess. The effect of this space oscillation was naturally not only to clean up the trash, but also to expand the radiation. The people on the roadside were affected and immediately covered their ears and fell down in pain. Then bang, 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 crash. The crystal windows of the houses near the roadside shattered in unison. Glass shards scattered all over the sky, reflecting the sunlight and sparkling with all kinds of magnificent colors. This was the attack of a space magician, or rather, this was the fury of an expert. With just a thought, he could change the entire situation in an instant. It wasn't that he couldn't kill, but that he didn't want to kill because it was meaningless and troublesome. After all, killing hundreds of ordinary people in broad daylight was no small matter. But now that he was boiling with rage, he naturally couldn't care less. This kind of indiscriminate spatial vibration was just a small trick, but it was enough to deal with ordinary people. If this continued, those people who were rolling on the ground and howling in pain would bleed from their 7 orifices and be directly shaken to death. At this moment, a furious roar suddenly came from afar. How dare you? How dare you attack ordinary people in the city? As soon as he finished speaking, a figure suddenly appeared in midair, not far away. He waved his staff, and a milky white light fell from the sky, directly striking Sang Poo, who was still shaking his right hand. Pursing his lips, Sang Poo flipped his hand and slashed horizontally. Scram! Chee! A few feet above his head, the soft sound of knife splitting water was heard. Then a black line suddenly appeared in the air, expanding like an open mouth, swallowing the white light and disappearing in an instant. Space magician. The person floating not far away cried out involuntarily. Without waiting for him to completely digest this shocking news, a black line appeared in the air a few meters in front of him, opened up, and the white light that had just disappeared rushed out in an instant. Being unable to resist, that person was directly hit by the white light, and then like a kite with a broken string, he fell askew, crashed through a pointed roof, and disappeared. After dealing with this uninvited guest, Sang Poo naturally didn't continue the spatial vibration. Looking at the moaning people on the ground, he snorted coldly, grabbed Oliver's shoulder, and shot out white light from his body. Let's go. Shio. 10 breaths later, the white light dissipated, and the two figures disappeared without a trace. A moment later, a figure turned from the fork in the road, and after seeing the situation here, quickly rushed over. A small section of the green magic staff's tail was broken. A white robe with red edges, a large part of the back was stained with mud, and a few parts were even directly torn open. This person was the bishop of the ancient city church, a high-ranked magician, and the one who had been directly shot down by Sang Poo. After seeing the miserable situation here, the bishop sighed and shook his head, constantly waving his staff to send out white light to cover the wounded on the ground. These people's injuries were not light, and all he could do now was to relieve their pain. Lord Bishop. The bishop turned his head in surprise, and saw a middle-aged woman struggling to crawl out of the broken wooden door of a house in the distance. This woman was the one who had attacked Sang-Pu first, and after being forcefully flung away, she directly crashed into a house. Although she suffered physical pain, she just happened to escape the range of the spatial vibration and could be considered lucky. Lord Bishop, just now, that was a blasphemous heresy. What? The bishop was stunned, and when he came back to his senses, his expression changed greatly, and he cried out involuntarily. In the western district of Ancient City, Sang-Pu and Oliver appeared in a small alley. It didn't take long for them to find the reason for the attack. A newspaper was placed in front of them, and both of them looked a little dazed. The accomplice who conspired to destroy the statue of the first holy maiden of the northern holy city has appeared. This was just the headline, and what followed was a retelling of the entire incident. How to put it, the content was meticulous, the profound was explained in simple terms, and could be said to be comprehensive. The reasoning was reasonable and well-founded, and it was really convincing. Not to mention the ordinary people, not to mention Sang-Pu and Oliver, who knew a little inside information. Even the people from the Mountain Stream City Police Department would give this report a thumbs up, praising it as the truth. Was this the truth? T. Sang-Pu and Oliver were about to go crazy when they saw how they were implicated in the incident without any disobedience. Heaven and earth can be witnesses, and God of light above. At that time, they were still hundreds of kilometers away in the forest fighting magical beasts and had nothing to do with this matter. Yes, Eunice was their teammate, but at most they were implicated. And this report was clearly dragging them down and directly putting the title of accomplice on them. How King wronged was this? But now, no matter how wronged Sang-Pu and Oliver were, it was useless. The yellow mud had already fallen into their crotch, and even if it wasn't SH*T, it was SH*T. And what was worse was that on the right side of the newspaper, there was actually a portrait of them. Not to mention, it was so lifelike and really looked like them. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.